Welcome to the Seahawks Podcast Event of the Year. The Emerald City Sportscast, teaming up with the Seahawks Playbook Podcast for one spectacular live crossover event. The guys are here to break down everything you need to know about the 2021 Seattle Seahawks in this massive training camp preview. And also joining the show, their very special guest, Corbin Smith of Seahawk Maven and the Locked On Seahawks podcast. And now, broadcasting from legendary Ozzies Tavern in Seattle, Washington, here are your hosts, Dan Viens, Bill Olvstad, and Keith Myers.
All right, everybody, welcome to the big crossover event of the year, as Jessica Rabbit just so aptly put it. Live from Ozzies Tavern in downtown Seattle, Lower Queen Anne. I am Dan Viens, host of the Emerald City Sportscast, joined by my esteemed colleagues, Bill Olvstad and Keith Myers of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. That's right, it is a crossover event, a Seahawks training camp preview as we live stream this. Appreciate you all tuning in. We've got a bunch of eyes on us so far. We're going to be here for the next few hours, at least 3 hours. We were taking bets on the over-under of whether we'll wrap up by 6 o'clock or not. I will definitely take the over. Lots to get to today as we break down the roster, look at the team heading into training camp, which kicks off later this week. Corbin Smith of Seahawk Maven and Locked On Seahawks podcast will be joining us in a little bit as well. I want to thank the folks here at Ozzies, Kathy Mahoney and her amazing staff, Emily and Amy back there serving drinks as well. If you're in the area and you can make it down here, it is happy hour. Lots of great food and drink specials. We all just ate, and the food here is fantastic, as good as you're going to find anywhere in Seattle at a bar like this. Let's get right to it because we don't have a lot of time to waste. I would like to first of all introduce Bill and Keith. So to make this happen, to bring this together, by the way, hello to those of you on the live stream. You'll be looking at the back of my head for most of this show. I apologize for that in advance. So Keith came up from Vancouver, Washington, where he makes his home. Bill came all the way from the Phoenix, Arizona area. That's how big a deal this is. And what I'd like to do is, guys, I want to introduce you, welcome you to Ozzies, welcome you to Seattle, and then give the viewers, those that may have not listened to your podcast before, just a little bit of history. You guys have done a lot of episodes. I think you're in the mid-200s now. Talk a little bit about how you guys met and how you guys decided to launch the Seahawks Playbook podcast.
Dan Viens. Man, it's great to be here. Thanks for joining us on a group event where your show and our show join forces and put this together. This idea has been brewing between the three of us for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And we decided to kind of put it into action. And so it's great to be here. My name is Bill Olvstad. Sitting next to my partner, Keith Myers. We're from the Seahawks Playbook podcast. As Dan mentioned, we are just published, episode number 235. 235 consecutive weeks in a row without missing a show.
That is prolific.
And so we have a great time doing that, and really looking forward to kind of sinking in to this show, talking about Seahawks. We've got a number of different topics. Special guest Corbin Smith coming in to join us in a little bit as we kind of get into the conversation. And just really excited. Also, a little bit of news to announce as well. Keith and I just recently signed an agreement to join a national podcast network, the Pigskin Podcast Network, that's going to be starting up in August, September 1st time period. So that'll give us a little bit more opportunity for some to reach a few more folks, and so we're excited about that. But let me turn it over to Keith and have him introduce himself. And
by the way, before you do that, on the big news, congratulations to you guys on the National Podcast Network. Let's hear it from the live audience a little bit here. There we go. Some of that canned and some of that real. Just like Lumen Field, some people believe.
No, it's never canned there. But it is, the roof does reflect some of the sound, so it helps, but it's never canned there. No, so you asked a little bit about our history. 235 episodes ago, it was one of those things where I was still managing editor of 12th Man Rising, and I wanted to start a show, and it was right when I was thinking about, retiring from that and getting out of it, and I was just interested, and Bill has some experience with podcasting and kind of knew what he was doing, and I had the expertise of running that site and knowing that, so it just made for a good combination, and we've kind of never looked back. It's been a fantastic partnership.
Well, and you bring up 12th Man Rising, that's how you and I met.
It is how you and I met.
I came on as a writer at first, and then there was an opportunity to join you as co-managing editor, and I think we did that for roughly a year together. I think the first time I met you in person was at a charity softball event.
Yep,
that was cool.
The Richard Sherman softball game.
Yeah, and
that
then
was fun.
We went to a training camp practice together as well, so that was a fun experience. And here's what's interesting, and I can say this now, I don't know if Kathy's listening, but so this place has some history. Not just, it's one of the oldest buildings in Lower Queen Anne, one of the oldest bars in Seattle. If you go to their website, there's a picture from literally 90 years ago of it sitting on the corner here, just a block and a half away from what used to be Key Arena, now Climate Pledge Arena. So very much a sports bar feel here. During the Sonic days, lots of pre and post game celebrations here. They're very excited about the Seattle Kraken returning, the NHL coming back to Seattle, launching later this fall. And I wanted to mention, for those of you in the area, you hockey fans, the expansion draft this Wednesday, where the Kraken will take their first shot at adding teams from players from other teams and starting to fill out their roster. They're having a draft party here. I believe that launches at about 4 or 5 o'clock Wednesday evening. And then the NHL league-wide draft is Friday. So if you're a hockey fan, come down to Ozzies, have a great time, eat some food, have some drinks, watch it on their many, many TVs, and watch the Kraken fill out their roster. But lots of history here, lots of sports history here, and lots of history for me personally here. I was the general manager here from 2014 to 2016, and so this was a real natural place, and we started talking about locations and where to host this for me to come back to, and it's been great to see it again. That corner over there, the dartboard has since moved. It's right back here, but this dartboard right behind me that you can't see on the live stream, one of Gary Payton's favorite places to hang out when he's in town. He loves to come down to Ozzies and play darts. So lots of history in that way. But it's so great for you guys to be here and for this idea that we've been kicking around for a couple of months to come to fruition, for sure. Before we move on, just a little bit about me. If you're watching because you're fans of Bill and Keith, nowhere near 235 episodes. And what impresses me about that is the fact that you guys have done it every single week since you launched the show. I'm at about 130 when you combine it with the former incarnation of my podcast, the Dan Cave podcast. And it's tough. It's tough. There's some weeks where there's not a lot going on. There's weeks when you have a lot going on in your personal life. So for you guys to do it every week is a testament to you, for sure. Let's move on to the rundown. And just to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at today, we're going to start with a positional group breakdown. We're going to go offense and defense, go position group by position group. What some of the things that we see happening and some of the predictions we have and some of the positional battles that we see forming throughout camp. Then we're going to bring Corbin in, and we're all going to talk about some potential breakout players on offense and defense. We're going to play a little round of buy or sell, just throw out some statements that may or may not be outlandish, and discuss and debate whether we buy or sell that particular statement of fact. We're going to talk quite a bit about Shane Waldron and the impact that he may have on the coaching staff and on the team on the field. We're going to go back a little bit. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the offseason drama, the Pete Carroll-Russell Wilson relationship, where we think that is now. We're We're going to talk about Jamal Adams and check in on his contract situation. Still not signed to an extension. Still unsure whether he's going to report for camp. We'll get Corbin's latest thoughts on that. We're going to go through the 2021 schedule, our feelings on that. It's a very unique schedule for the Seahawks this year. And then we're going to give our predictions as well. But first segment right out of the gate, we are, as I mentioned, at Ozzies. And one of the things I've always appreciated about Ozzies is they have about 18 beers on tap. A couple of them are domestics and some of the macro beers. But for the most part, they stick to Northwest local microbrews. We each have one in front of us, so let's play a little round of what are you drinking? And I'll start with, I was so happy to see that they still have this beer on tap. It was first brought on back in late 2015-16 when I was still here from what was then a very new brewery, Hellbent Brewing. And this is their Funky Red Patina. It's a red ale, and it's delicious. What I appreciate about it is some red ales tend to get a little too sweet. This one's not. Real nice balance of hops and sweetness, and I quite enjoy it.
Yeah.
And Bill chose one of the most classic Seattle microbrews of all time and a very important one in my life. Bill, tell us about what you're drinking.
You can probably share more about it than I could, being the mixologist expert at the table. But I'm doing the Mac and Jack's African Amber, and I'm an amber guy, and this is about the richest, fullest, tastiest amber that I've really come across. So every time I get a chance to have it off of a tap, I generally pour one and really enjoy it. So I've almost completed one, and I've got another one in the wings waiting after that. So what do you know about it that you can share with me? Because I'm honestly, it's just good.
Well, it really was one of the first Seattle-based microbrews that became massively popular. And what was unique about it is it got to a point where I want to say in the early 2000s, really, you could walk into any beer in King County for sure, and then later in the 2000s up and down Western Washington, and it was on tap in every bar. And what's really unique about that is they never, until very recently, you can now get it in cans. They never did retail, never really did a lot of marketing. It was all word of mouth and kind of ground level guerrilla type marketing. And it just grew because it was good beer. And it's literally the beer that got me to stop drinking Bud Light. That is my
we all have one of those.
That's my transitional beer, my gateway microbrew. That I was bartending at a little place in North Bend 20 years ago, and I finished a shift during happy hour, and I came out and sat down with a couple of regulars and had my Bud Light pint in front of me, and a guy sitting next to me goes, "What the hell are you drinking?" And I told him it was Bud Light, and he slid the Mac and Jacks in front of me. It was a fresh pint. And he said, "Just take a sip of this. It's like adult chocolate milk." I'll never forget those words. And I drank about this much of it, and I realized, wow, this beer actually tastes good. It has flavor. And also, I'm kind of feeling pretty good right about here, too. And I've never looked back. Haven't had a Bud Light since.
Nice.
Keith, what are you drinking?
So I walked up and I just said, "What's the darkest beer you have?" Because I'm a dark beer drinker. And they handed me this. It is a peanut butter stout from Lucky Envelope Brewing here in Seattle.
Okay.
And I have never had it before, and I'm unfamiliar with that particular brewery because I don't live in Seattle anymore. But it's good. It's tasty.
Chunky or creamy?
Creamy.
Okay. I'll have to try that later. Something else about Keith. Keith knows his beer. Does some brewing, right?
Yes, I do.
Before we move on, what's your latest batch? What are you working on right now?
What I'm working on now is a naturally dry cider. That's what's currently in the fermenter.
Okay.
It was apples not that long ago, and pressed it into the cider, and then now it's fermenting. So
fantastic,
good stuff.
I'll have to come down to Vancouver and take home a growler.
Yeah,
exactly.
You guys want to talk some Seahawks?
Let's talk Seahawks.
We should probably talk football.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the positional group breakdown. Let's start on offense and just kind of I'll throw out the position and we can kind of talk about some ideas of who we think the starter is and maybe how solid we think that person's footing is in that position and maybe some guys behind him that could surprise. Let's start with quarterback because it's it's so sketchy right now as to who the starting quarterback is going to be opening day.
Yeah.
Any ideas, Keith?
It could be anyone, but if I had to bet, I'd probably say Russell Wilson.
Let's talk about this, because it's so boring to talk about the quarterback position, but here's the thing. Let me go down this road then. They brought back Geno Smith again on a one-year deal. They have Etling and Magoo behind them. Both guys spent the entire season on the practice squad last year. First time they've ever carried two extra quarterbacks. Part of that was for COVID protection. Any chance that Alex Magoo or Danny Etling has any opportunity to overtake Geno Smith for the backup role with a good camp?
Well, we talked about this a little bit on our last show, in that obviously Russell Wilson's not getting challenged, hasn't been challenged for a long time. Geno Smith's got that job, I believe, because the team trusts him. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it comes down to with that second-string quarterback, as Russell Wilson occupies that first spot. Is you're not going to get a lot of quality snaps there, if any snaps at all. And so you want a guy that's, if needed, Russell Wilson twists an ankle, whatever, knock on wood, you're going to have a guy that can come in and finish a game for you, get you through a couple quarters, maybe have to start a game and a half or whatever. If it's beyond that, something serious has gone wrong. You're probably not going to want to depend on Danny Etling or Alex Magoo to have long-term quality starts for you. So going out of camp, I think that you would have to really look at injury situation to somebody like Geno Smith in order for those other guys to kind of penetrate a starting situation. But those guys are looking to build their resume, are looking to gain trust from those position coaches, Pete Carroll, so that they can use that to maybe look at other opportunities around the league, other opportunities in the Canadian Football League, that sort of thing. For the Seahawks, I think right now, with Wilson, the background of the year that Wilson has had, and Geno Smith being there, I think this is the year you probably don't want to throw out a bunch of chances on some younger guys coming in. You're going to go with the sure thing. That's my personal opinion. You go with Geno Smith, you go with Russell Wilson, what you know, what you trust.
Sure.
And this is a season where the Seahawks, I think, are really trying to get beyond where they've been the last 2 or 3 years, which is a one-and-out type situation in the playoffs. They want to go to that second level. They want to get to that NFC Championship game. I think a good, solid, quality backup quarterback is probably your best opportunity to do that.
Oh, yeah. This is a team that wants to compete. This is a team that wants to go deep in the playoffs and make a run at a Super Bowl, and you're not going to do that. If Wilson goes down and has to miss a game or two, who gives you the better shot to win? It's going to be Geno Smith, and that they're going to, because they know they can't just throw away a game or two because Wilson can't play.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is that whichever one of those two guys ends up on the practice squad, if Wilson goes down and can't return, and it's basically like, we're turning this over to a backup for the year, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with the guy coming off the practice squad getting more starts than Geno. Because if you're going to go without Wilson, you're going to lose a lot of games. It doesn't matter which of the three it is. And if you're going to lose a lot of games, you might as well lose a lot of games and get yourself in some really good draft position.
I would disagree with that a little bit. I would say that the chances would be higher to go outside of the organization and pull somebody in to take a look at that spot. But you've got a point.
I do think it's going to make for a fun preseason in some ways, because this is going to be unlike any preseason maybe we've ever seen. Cut down to 3 games now instead of 4. And so we don't quite know yet how that's going to look. Which game? I'm assuming the second one is going to be the one where the veterans play a little deeper. They know what they have in Geno Smith, although new offensive coordinator, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, and so maybe they'll try to get him quite a bit of snaps. I could see this team with a truncated preseason playing a lot of Etling and Magoo, because one of those guys is going to be on the practice squad, but probably only one, as you mentioned. And so, that's an interesting battle. Personally, I remember when they drafted Alex Magoo in the 7th round a few years ago. They really liked him. Schneider really talked him up. He showed some flashes. I remember he had one throw in a preseason game where he's rolling to his right, threw a ball about 50 yards downfield to about the 1 or 2, guy leaning out of bounds. Really pinpoint throw on the run. He has a much stronger arm than Danny Etling, but they're both interesting guys in that they're both very athletic and they're mobile and they can move around. In fact, Etling has kind of been talked about by some people as similar to the guy in New Orleans that I'm blanking on his name right now. But where maybe he can play some kind of gadget positions.
Taysom Hill.
Yeah, exactly. But Magoo has more arm talent for sure.
Yeah, much.
And so I think it could be fun to watch in the preseason just to see those guys battle a little bit. But we've probably spent way too much time talking about quarterback for a team that has one of the elite quarterbacks in the league.
There are literally in 9 years, very few meaningful snaps other than Russell Wilson at quarterback. Now, obviously that can change at any time, but...
And I will say, we'll talk at length in the Shane Waldron segment about how we think the changes on offense will suit him. But I will say, from a personal standpoint, there have been off seasons where sometimes being a Russell Wilson fan is challenging. Sometimes it's frustrating. And there was a time there a few years ago where he was trying to feel his way out as to how to handle his off-field persona and some of his outside interests, where it seemed like, as a football fan, like it was easy to question whether or not he was as committed to the game as we want him to be as fans. I don't get that feeling at all anymore. I think he's reached a point now where he's completely comfortable with both sides of his life, and he looks as fit and lean to me as he has, because I think it was 2 off seasons ago where it was a little bit of the opposite. Kind of the joke was like, he's looking a little puffy.
Little dad bod going on.
He looks as good to me this off season as he has in a long time. I think he's taken on this challenge, and I think he's ready to go. Let's talk about the running back room, because this is one of the most fascinating positions, I think, on the team. I think at the end of last season, we've talked about it on our respective shows when we've appeared on each other's. If you were taking odds at the end of the season whether or not Chris Carson was going to be back, I would have said maybe 20%. I thought he was gone. Having him back, big shock. And having him back at a reasonable number is nice as well. Rashard Penny coming off a season last year where he got healthy, presumably. We heard all about how explosive he looked in practice, that they didn't really give him opportunities that much near the end of the year. Now we find out he had another little minor procedure in the offseason. We don't know how healthy he's going to be in the last year of his deal. And then they've got some interesting depth there with some young guys. Talk about the running back room. And first of all, how much faith do you have in Chris Carson playing 16 games? And how do you think the position group shapes up behind him?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's first talk about that contract situation, because I think we were all in the same boat. I think the expectation for Chris going into the offseason was that he was going to be looking for that payday. And that payday was going to be roughly anywhere from $8.5 to a $9.5 million contract. And it was our belief, at least on our show, that he wasn't going to get that. And it was going to be a waiting game for him as teams pulled away from those sort of expectations. And he sat there for a little bit. And at that point, I thought that would be a good opportunity for the Seahawks to be able to come in at anywhere from $4.5 to $6 million and kind of swoop him up on a 2-year deal. But I put those odds fairly low. I thought Chris would end up going somewhere else.
Yeah.
If it was going to be anybody that was going to give him that amount, he might not come back to the Seahawks for that. Ended up being that the Seahawks put themselves in a real nice position. I think if you take a look at John Schneider overall, in the way that he approached a number of different contracts, in that really patient waiting game, letting the markets play out at each position group, really benefited the Seahawks. And Chris Carson was one of those benefits, to be able to come back to the team at that low number. Really helped solidify a position that was a question mark going into free agency and into the draft. I think all of us were kind of looking at other options at a certain point. And then Chris came back. Obviously, Rashad Penny wasn't going to be have a 5th-year option extended to him, but he was going to go ahead and play out that 4th year. Let's find out where he's at. So the room itself, to me, is really interesting, because when we were talking on the road trip up here today, Rashad Penny could go one of 2 directions. He could get nicked up again, not have any impact at all, or very limited carries. Or this could be an opportunity for Rashad Penny to really break out. In fact, we're talking about a breakout segment in a little while. He's definitely a candidate that you would have to have on your list offensively as a player that you would look at that might have an opportunity to have a big impact on the roster that nobody's really talking about right now. Nobody, in fact, as a person that has been injured a few times, you hesitate to even bring up Rashad Penny as somebody that could have somewhat of an impact.
Yeah,
so I think if he does,
he hasn't quite reached CJ Prosise status,
quite,
but I think in a lot
it.
of fans' eyes, he's in a similar state.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think with him, it's like the talent is there.
Sure.
It's undeniable. Like and actually scheme fit for what we believe is Waldron's scheme. You know, kind of looking more at what the Rams do and that kind of stuff. And we don't know for certain because it's not going to be exactly what the Rams do. But the assumptions that we've made, he's a better scheme fit for that offense than Chris Carson. And so if he can stay healthy, he is poised to have a massive year in Seattle, but he's got to stay healthy, and he hasn't done that at any point in his pro career.
Well, from a personal perspective, for him, I mean, this is it. I mean, if he doesn't have enough motivation now, this could be a career-defining year. I mean, even if he's a guy that just stays healthy for 16 games, he's the clear backup to Chris Carson. You know, he gets enough carries and touches to get 600-700 yards. He's a productive rotational player. There's a market for that for him to go on to next year with another team.
The question is, Dan, how do you feel about the roster behind him?
Exactly. And one more point about Rashad Penny is I just hope he has a good enough year that guys like me stop calling him Rashard. I mean, because I'm not there yet.
There you go.
I'm not there yet. Behind him is interesting. No one really... I don't know that there's a guy behind him that could be... What's always interesting to me about running back rooms is there's a lot of teams in the league that have a third, fourth, or even fifth guy in some cases that you can squint your eyes and see a guy that in the right situation can really break out and become an outstanding primary back. There aren't any of those other guys on the roster. A lot of role players.
I would disagree with that. I think there's one.
Okay.
I would say Alex Collins has the talent. And only because we saw it when he was in Baltimore. He ran, he came in and had that 1 year where he...
Had 1,000 yards.
Yeah, because of the injuries and whatever, he stepped up and became the guy and got it done. And so he's like the one guy that I'm like, yeah, if you squint hard enough, you can say, okay, he could probably do it. But I wouldn't ever pick him as like, I see
that from an effort standpoint. Love the way he runs, and I hope he makes this roster. I was really happy they brought him back. From an instinctive standpoint, I don't see him as a guy that has those kind of skills. It can be a 20-touch-a-game guy. But I really do hope he makes the roster, which then comes down to where we could potentially be looking at a DJ Dallas versus Travis Homer battle for the last spot in that room. Two former college roommates. Who do you like in that battle?
I like Dallas. In that battle. One, he's younger. He's got more team control. Two, I just think he's more talented. He's bigger. He's a
little more physical.
More physical. Homer just does not run up the middle well. We saw that a couple years ago when he got a chance to get some considerable playing time. He just isn't physical enough to run up the middle at the NFL. Got some speed, can do some stuff on the outside, but what does Seattle want? Like, what do they need out of a running back? Now, if he shows his ability to pass block and can become a third down option, I think there's a spot for him. But so far, he just isn't a great fit for Seattle. He needs to go find a team, like New Orleans last year. But now that they've got a new quarterback, who knows? But, a situation like that, I think he'd be a better fit for that than in Seattle.
Yeah.
How many guys do you think are on the roster, at the running back spot? I mean, how many guys are they?
Well, they brought back Nick Bellore again.
That's right.
And does he count as a fifth guy in that room, or is he just kind of beyond that, where they don't even count him as a fullback anymore? And I don't know. We'll see. And it'll be interesting to get Corbin's thoughts on this when he sits down. We'll ask him if he has any insight into what he's heard from us during this segment as well. And he's had his eyes on some practice in person, so I'd be interested to see what he thinks of Josh Johnson as well, the undrafted free agent, who was kind of banged up, and then the COVID situation last year really didn't get a lot of touches on the field, but had an outstanding year in 2019 where he looked like he was on the radar, maybe a draftable player at that point, and really put some things on tape that make him interesting. I don't know. None of us know, because all we have to go on is 2-year-old college tape of whether a guy like that can make the roster. Let's talk about wide receivers because this one's fascinating too.
This is a good room.
You're talking about a top-heavy room, right? Maybe in the argument for one of the best 1-2 punches in the league.
Absolutely.
With DK Metcalf entering his third season, Tyler Lockett fresh off the new contract extension. He's going to be in Seattle for at least the next couple of seasons. Then you get down to Freddie Swain and a whole bunch of rookies. So, Bill, where do we start on this?
Well, you're right. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I just rewatched the 49er game at the end of the year last year with my folks. Happened to be visiting, and they wanted to put on a game, and that's the game they put on. And Tyler Lockett had a heck of a game there. Just reminded me just how crafty he is, how much Russell Wilson has rapport with him and trusts him to be able to get into spots. And then DK Metcalf. We talk all the time, his rookie year. We tried to lower expectations as much as possible for folks that listen to our show. Just like, hey, this guy's got a lot on his plate. Let's just kind of see where he lands. After his rookie season, we kind of loaded him up last year.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, the reins are off. Let's load up the expectations. And he blew those away.
Yeah.
And so what do you do this year with DK Metcalf? Well, the only place for him, to me, is up. This guy is, especially in Shane Waldron's offense, where the idea is going to be to give DK Metcalf more opportunity to have touches in open space.
Yeah.
And, we all saw glimpses of what DK Metcalf can do once he gets the ball and he's gained separation. The guy's a monster. And so I'm really looking forward to that top. And then Dwayne Eskridge, I think, brings a dynamic ability that in Shane Waldron's offense to be able to gain separation, create some space for himself, and after that is a yards after catch monster potentially. And so a guy like Dwayne Eskridge, which has some of the best hands I've seen potentially come into the roster since like Doug Baldwin, as far as being able to hand fight, gain some separation, overwhelm some guys. He's a smaller guy, like 5'10", 195, but he's kind of a bigger bodied guy. He's not quite as slight as Lockett, and I think he's going to be able to use that physicality, kind of create some space, and really do some special things for the Seahawks. Now, we talked a little bit before the show about some of the other guys. Then you've got a whole litany of guys that really don't have a lot of experience on the roster. I think Penny Hart's got a little bit of experience, but she maybe gives him a leg up. We talked about last week of making the roster over some of the other guys. Freddie Swain is a guy that we all think could have an impact as a steady pass catcher. He doesn't do any one thing really well. He's not special, but he does everything actually pretty decent. He's a good pass catcher. He's a good route runner. He's a solid guy. He's at 6 foot, 200 pounds. So he'd be an interesting fit. John Ursula, everybody's waiting to kind of find out if that guy's going to ever emerge. Aaron Fuller, Cody Thompson, they really like. Cody Thompson, the Cade Johnson kid that we picked up, an undrafted free agent this year. Nobody really knows kind of what to expect. He did a lot of things in college, but at a kind of the second tier in college, and so what kind of an impact can he have on an NFL roster? We'll find out.
There's two position groups that I think are going to be the most fascinating and important to watch during the preseason. One's on defense. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I think this is the other one because I think Swain's a lock. As much as you talk about, he doesn't have that one elite tool, that one elite skill that jumps off the page, but he's really solid in all those areas, and he's a great special teams player, and we know how much value they place on that. And he's got 1 year in the program, whereas all these other guys we're talking about have, Penny Hart's been in the program on and off for a couple of years, but all these other guys are rookies. We all thought, in fact, I think we talked a couple of months ago on your show about Tamarian Terry, the undrafted free agent out of Florida State, that was showing up on a lot of those lists of sleepers to make the roster as an undrafted free agent. Yeah. Obviously, with his legal issues, he's not going to be playing football this year, maybe never again. That opens an opportunity for some of these other guys. The factor that we don't know is we can look at these guys and what they've done in college, what they did at the Senior Bowl, what they did in their pro days, but we don't know how it's going to fit with Shane Waldron's offense. Keith, let me ask you this. With what we saw to DK Metcalf and his jump from year 1 to year 2 as far as a route runner, and if you assume that much, if not all, of that Rams-type passing game is going to be integrated with the Seahawks running game, which it sounds like they're doing. How do you think DK Metcalf fits in that offense? Because there isn't anything on the Rams roster that's similar to him at all to give us kind of a blueprint of what he might look like. How do you see Shane Waldron using him?
Well, there's a lot of different parts to that question. One is that in the Rams offense, they had Jared Goff throwing passes, who can't get the ball more than 15 yards downfield. So a player like,
but if he had DK Metcalf, Jared Goff might still be
maybe
in Los Angeles.
I don't know, but he doesn't. He throws a terrible deep ball. He just is not a downfield passer, and that's why. You didn't see any of that in the Rams, but how much is that as the quarterback versus the talent at wide receiver versus the scheme? Anytime you got a guy like Metcalf, he's going to change what you do offensively because he's just so talented. You can't deny what he does. And you got a quarterback in Russell Wilson who throws a fantastic deep ball and is really dynamic and looks for those big plays, and he's got that big playmaker. I think you're going to see a much more downfield version of the Rams offense, which is why the Rams went and made their trade at quarterback anyways, because they wanted a more downfield version. So honestly, as far as stats and whatever, like if we assume that he's going to take another step, because most players, especially wide receivers, take a step between year 2 and year 3. Like year 3 is kind of the big year for them. He was already a Pro Bowler. Where do you go? How much higher is up for DK Metcalf? Because if he takes another jump up, we're talking a guy that's going to be an all-pro.
Well, and if the things that we assume about the new offense come to fruition, which is using the whole field, spreading the ball around more, using the short intermediate more, getting the ball out quicker, you talk about the sky's the limit being DK Metcalf, because the one thing we didn't get to see in that Rams offense, and I'm sure Shane Waldron is so happy to have, is a guy that can just go make plays, a guy that can win the 50-50 balls. Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, they were more based on getting separation and body control and really working those crossing patterns. DK is a guy that if you're in trouble, Russell can just you're going to win against most corners.
I think for the very first time, we're going to actually see Sean McVay's offense the way that it's intended to be put forward.
I've always been surprised that they don't go get or try to get even a guy like that. But that's another conversation for another day. Let's move on to the tight end group. Another interesting one. So I think even if they hadn't have made a move in free agency, this would have been a fun segment. Because Will Dissley is a guy, when he was drafted out of the University of Washington a couple of years ago, that really burst on the scene. Made a dynamic impact his first 2 games as a professional. And then he had the ACL injury. Then he comes back his second year. Same thing. Right out of the gate. Looks like a guy that he was billed coming out in the draft as the best blocker in the draft that had some upside as a pass catcher. But we saw him being used as a primary weapon, a guy that could run after the catch, really athletic for his size, for a former offensive lineman playing at the Pac-12 level. And then he tore his Achilles. 2 back-to-back severe injuries. Last year, year 3, stayed healthy all year, but it almost seemed like they were handling him with kid gloves, like they were afraid to really kind of give him a full load. So he's sort of under the radar, but he would have been a fun guy to talk about if we thought he was going to be the number 1 guy. Then they go out last year and they draft Cody Parkinson in the middle rounds. 6'7", tall, long arms, 0 drops his last season at Stanford. A real unique type weapon at the tight end position. But they go out in free agency and they don't rest on their laurels. They're not happy with that. They signed Gerald Everett away from the Los Angeles Rams, who Shane Waldron had a tremendous amount of connection with, was his tight ends coach his first year there. A deep group where all 3 guys have unique skill sets. There's not going to be a lot of touches to go. It'll be interesting to see how they manage that. But just talk about that group. It's fun.
Well, we talked about it on our show. I thought the group has a chance to be like a 25, 45, 45 group, meaning that Parkinson has a chance at 25 receptions. Everett has a chance at 45, so does Dissley. Last year we were a 25, 25, 25 group. Hollister had 25. Dissley had 25, and Olsen had 25 receptions, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see an expanded use of that group. I think the opportunities, the efficiencies, the quick strike, the tempo is going to allow us to have better efficiency on third down, more conversions, more opportunities for the tight end group to have an impact. I think those things are going to get spread out a little bit. You're right. They all bring different elements to the offense. Gerald Everett's a guy that can gain separation right away. He's more of a upgraded Hollister, if you want to kind of compare. Dissley came on last year at the very end. If you watch the last 2 or 3 games, he really started to have an impact. You could kind of see that he was starting to have confidence again in his Achilles, getting fully healthy, and they were using him a little bit more towards the end of the season when they were struggling on throwing the ball deep. And then Parkinson, we never really got a chance to see, but you can obviously get a sense from listening to folks talk, and Corbin maybe can speak to this later when he joins us, about Colby Parkinson's unique opportunity as a red zone target in this offense.
Really long.
So for me, I think this group has tremendous upside and really adds to the dynamic nature of, I think, what we're going to see this year with Russell Wilson paired with Waldron.
Well, and Keith, I think what makes it really interesting, even more so than just the talent in that room, is the Rams had Tyler Higbee along with Gerald Everett. We're going to see 2 guys on the field a lot.
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the things that Waldron has even said coming in, that he likes using tight ends because he likes the fact that you can run with that, you can throw with that. It doesn't dictate what you're doing, and so defenses have to defend everything. And the fact that you've got a guy like Everett and a guy like Dissley who can both kind of do everything, that's huge. And I think that within all of that, we talked a lot about Dissley and his his upside and how he showed to be dynamic at times, but he was still the best blocking tight end in the draft that year. And there are times, even last year, when you could tell he wasn't quite fully healthy with that Achilles injury, where they left him one-on-one against a defensive end, and he held his own. Like, he is essentially a right tackle who can also run and catch passes. He's a really good blocker. You don't see tight ends like that. I mean, Zach Miller was the last one who, Breno Giacomini owes his reputation in Seattle to Zach Miller, who did the job way better than he did. Yeah. And it's one of those things where with Dissley, he can be that guy, and he's shown he is that guy. He's a fantastic blocker, and that's a really big weapon for this offense, because it's going to give Wilson more time. It's going to allow him to move the pocket and get outside and throw those deeper balls. And it's one of those aspects of playing tight end that I think people miss because there's no stat. Yeah. Right? There's no receptions, there's no touchdowns or whatever, but it's such a big part of what they do, and he's really, really good at it.
So that leaves us with, we talk about, good segue, Will Dissley kind of being a 6th offensive lineman if they need it. Now let's talk about the offensive line. Historically, the much maligned offensive line, to the point that people that aren't diehard Seahawk fans still think it's a terrible offensive line. If you get into online debates, as I know you guys probably have, as I do sometimes with fans of other teams, they still point to that as a reason that they think the Seahawks aren't going to be as good as the Rams or maybe even the 49ers this year. Or if you get enough beers in a guy, the Cardinals. But they went out and got Gabe Jackson in a trade. Mm-hmm. Everything else, status quo. Other than the fact they're going to switch him and Damian Lewis right guard to left guard. They bring Ethan Posik back to play center, a position we all thought they might upgrade either in the draft or free agency. You bring Brandon Shell back at right tackle again. Obviously, Dwayne Brown is there at left tackle. And then they essentially brought back their entire backup group. Mm-hmm. Your overall thoughts on the offensive line this year, and let's frame it in the context of, I'll just ask you this question, Bill. Is this the best offensive line, potentially, that Russell Wilson has had a chance to play behind, let's say, since 2016?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a really good question for Keith. This is kind of one of his expertise. But yeah, in my opinion, this has an opportunity to be. You really have to see how the team does with Lewis over on the left side. Yeah. I think it's going to be great. Personally, I think it's a great move. Jackson is definitely comfortable on the right side. You've got now Lewis and Brown on the left side that gives the Seahawks a really nice tandem over on the left side with Posik in the center, holding down the fort. It technically wouldn't be any worse than it would be last year, but potentially better, given the fact that Upati is no longer there, struggling with some injuries and underperforming a little bit on the left side, and Posik kind of having to compensate for that and not doing such a great job some of the time, being a little nicked up halfway through the season, and then just kind of getting through it. This year he maybe has a better opportunity surrounded by two guys that could potentially be Pro Bowl level type players there, left guard and right guard. You add Shell into the mix. To me, I think that this has a great opportunity. You pair that, though, the key would be to adding the Waldron equation to this situation, where you've got a little bit more tempo now involved, a little bit more timing. You're getting the ball out a little quicker. It has an opportunity to really affect the pass blocking, the timing, the amount of time Russell has, the perception that Russell has now more time to throw and is being more accurate, is getting the ball out to his receivers better. And it just seems like this offensive line completes everything we just talked about and makes the entire offense work together better, and to me has the potential really to be the best offense overall that we've seen in the Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson era.
Keith, let me ask you a more pointed question. I think we all feel good about the guards. Great about the guards. I think we feel good about the tackles. Brandon Shell was a clear upgrade over Fetty at right tackle, and Dwayne Brown, if he's healthy, we all agree, is still one of the better left tackles in the league. Ethan Posik is the real question mark. We saw last year in the first half, he looked like an NFL center. Second half, not so much. How much of that was his injuries? How much of that was Upati not being healthy or Simmons being a liability? You're the offensive line guy. You've been hard on Posik in the past. Going up against the rest of the NFC West, that interior defensive line is really the strength of the other three rosters, as we've seen. Is Posik a liability on that line still, or can the rest of the line make up for it, and can he be serviceable enough to make that line work?
I think he can be serviceable. I think that's the right word. Asking him to be good, I think, is asking him to be what he's not.
Does he have to be, though?
I don't know if he does. Because no one realistically is asking him to block Aaron Donald one-on-one.
Right.
Did he draw that assignment a couple times last year? Yeah, and he lost.
Yeah.
But you know what?
Most centers do.
There isn't. Yeah, there isn't a center in the NFL that can draw that regularly and win.
Right.
His biggest issue is he really just lacks the functional strength that you see other players have. And I think in Seattle we were used to seeing with Justin Britt, who had his own issues, but the functional strength, in drive blocking was not one of them.
Yeah.
And so Posik doesn't have that. He's much more of a technician. He wins with footwork and hand placement and all that, but he can be mauled. And so there are times when you've got to give him a double team. But he's got really good guards beside him that can give him that double team, even if it's just for a second or two, and then they release. Anything that can help him get everything set and make it work.
What do you think about Ethan Posik's ability in Shane Waldron's wide zone scheme and the athletic upside that maybe Posik has over other centers?
Oh yeah, and that's the other half of this is that in the running game, asking him to block straight ahead is not asking him to play to his strengths.
Right.
In an outside zone or a zone stretch scheme, which is what presumably they're bringing, one of the things that Waldron's is bringing in, he's much better fitted for that because that's getting, that's when everyone's moving laterally, and then you're sealing the back end, you're pushing the front end out, and you're just letting the running back make the cut as to depending on who wins the block and all that. That outside zone running scheme is actually a better fit for him because he can get people moving sideways and not have to actually push them, but they're already going to want to be going in the direction of the play. You just keep them going in that direction. You just wash them out. It's a different style of blocking, and it fits his talents better than what they were asking him to do last year.
And for me, that draws the question, how does Damian Lewis and Gabe Jackson fit into that? Do they fit into that as well? Do they have enough athletic upside for us to be able to seamlessly bring in that zone blocking scheme that we're going to implement, and those guys will be able to handle those assignments seamlessly.
Gabe Jackson, Dwayne Brown, Brandon Shell have already played in an outside zone. You've seen that, less with Shell, but they did some of it. And Lewis is athletically gifted and can handle it. I mean, he can win the drive block, but he can also win in space, and he can push people sideways. He can do anything.
No.
His ceiling is really high. I'm not concerned at all. And really what it comes down to is it is a better fit for Posik. Not that you should ever design your scheme around a mediocre center, but if that is going to be your scheme, he's a better fit for that one than what they were doing last year.
Let's move to the other side of the ball. Pete Carroll's strength and specialty, and something that early last year took a beating. Did not look like a typical Pete Carroll defense or a Seahawks defense. They put some things together the second half. And then they went out this offseason and really addressed some things. Let's start up front and work our way back. Let's start on the interior, because the defensive ends we're going to talk about in a second, that's going to be a lot of fun. Defensive tackle. They lose Jaron Reed there. They like what they have. But when you hear criticisms of the Seahawks defense or question marks, some of it's at corner. We're gonna get to that, but also at defensive tackle. Are they stout enough? Are they good enough in the middle right now with what they have on hand, where you'd like to see them heading into camp?
I thought it was an interesting decision the way Jaron Reed approached his contract situation, and the team did too. I think that they were caught off guard a little bit by that, decided to move on. And that decision kind of told you what they thought about where they were at.
Yeah.
Because, that's a key position for them. One of the pillars.
Wanted to keep him.
Sure.
It's not like they kicked him to the curb. Actually offered him more money in 2021.
And one of the pillars of Pete Carroll's defense is defending the run and the ability to have some interior push and to kind of control that line of scrimmage. Team brought in Al Woods. Al Woods did not play in 2020 because of COVID. That was a decision for him. They re-upped on Poona Ford, gave him a 2-year extension, which was awesome. But Poona Ford's an undersized guy. He's a great guy, but he's just short maybe of being a Pro Bowl guy, but maybe has that potential. Yeah. We'll see this year. He's surrounded by a really decent line, so we'll find out. Brian Monet they like. Big guy.
They better like him, because it seems like they're putting a lot on him being what they want him to be.
Well, let's talk about a wild card here.
I was going to say, before we leave Monet, remember, he was the guy that kept Snacks Harrison on the bench for like 3 weeks. And then when
everybody was crying for him, why aren't they activating Harrison?
Yeah. And then Monet got hurt, Harrison played. Yeah. And then when Monet got healthy, Harrison went back to the bench. Mm-hmm. And then eventually
went to Green Bay.
Then went off the roster because he's like, I don't want to sit. And I don't blame him.
And they like a number of guys.
Yeah.
There's a number of guys, Lattimore, Adams. They really like Adams. They grabbed the guy in undrafted free agent, Hewitt, a couple other guys. The big thing for me is Kim Dichie.
Yeah.
This is kind of a thing that nobody really talked about in the offseason. In fact, we talked about it kind of almost offhand in a show a few weeks ago.
Super under the radar for a guy who was a first-round pick,
right? And
26 years old still, I think.
Right, and does he even have the desire to want to play? All those kind of question marks. We all get that. We understand that. But any indicate. In fact, this would be a great subject for Corbin to comment on as we get through with this segment. Where's he at? Where's he at mentally? I know that the coaches have kind of praised him. Not directly, completely, but like his energy, like his competition and so forth. And so, for me, if that guy turns out, that could actually be one of the very key signings and potential impact players on the roster at that spot. Because when you really look at it, he's got a really decent opportunity to make the roster at that 3-tech spot, because there's just not a lot there. They're going to rotate Collier in. From the 5-tech and maybe a couple other guys that you'll see kind of in that mix. But Kim Dichie really has an opportunity, if he seizes it, to have a big impact on that that front four.
Well, and that was the story during OTAs, was him recognizing that he isn't going to be given a lot more opportunities, that this is maybe the last one for him, and he really needs to seize it, and how he understands that, and he's working really hard, and he really wants to like resurrect his career and all of that. So I think that if that's not lip service, if he's actually putting in the work, the guy was a physical freak. I mean, this is a guy that can just play.
What do you think, Dan?
I think this might be the key to the whole defense. I know some people will say it's corner, but I think it's the interior. If they can play run defense, stop the run as Pete likes to at a high level, and get any kind of contributions from a penetration standpoint in there, then this next group we're about to talk about is going to be even more effective. And I kind of think that the defense might sink or swim a little bit on how much production they get from their interior guys. Because on the outside, we've talked about how much we like this group. And after 3 straight off seasons of we got to add to the pass rush, we got to fix the pass rush, we got to fix the pass rush, and nothing happening to any of our liking, they went out this offseason and clearly made it a priority in adding to the defensive end position, signing Kerry Hyder in free agency, a guy who's super versatile, can contribute on the inside as well, and plays a run, and just a real great hand fighter and real active guy. Bringing back Dunlap when a lot of people thought he was gone, especially after they cut him to free up that space, and having the confidence that they had that kind of relationship with him that they could bring him back and be creative with the money. And then the young guys, and Darrell Taylor being 100% healthy and looking healthy in OTAs, and how much he plays linebacker will stand to see. And Alton Robinson, and we still don't know if Alden Smith's going to be cleared to play or not, but if he is, he's the 6th option out there.
You haven't even mentioned Benson Mayowa.
Who was really good in the second half last year, especially with Dunlap on the field as kind of a rotational guy. Just the kind of depth and layering that we haven't seen at that position since the Super Bowl years. And maybe if all these guys reach their potential on par with that group, I know, Bill, you feel that way.
Yeah, I mentioned this a few weeks ago on our show, that this group has the potential to be the best group since 2013. Yeah. And I still believe that. I think we talked, you kind of gave me a little hard time on that. Like,
of course I did.
I was discounting the 2013 season, and I wasn't at all. I'm lifting up this potential because you take a look at this.
Not to be taken lightly. We're talking about Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett being backups on that line.
Right. And the other part of that is, he was talking about me giving him a hard time. That has nothing to do with football.
That's kind of constant.
It's just part of the show.
That's so exactly. Any day that ends in Y.
What's going to happen with this roster that you've just talked about is we're going to have to cut a guy. We're going to have to maybe cut 2 guys. You talked about
Didn't we talk about Rasheem Green?
You talked about Darrell Taylor almost in passing. This guy is going to be given an opportunity to be a starting Sam linebacker and come up and rush the passer.
Yeah, we get to talk about him in 2 position groups.
Exactly. And he could be on the field for 75%, 80% of the snaps. Yeah. He could have a huge impact this year. And we don't even know what we've got with him.
What's interesting about the saying, that's the Bruce Irvin role, is Bruce Irvin was undersized as a defensive end, and that's why he kind of didn't stick there and ended up at linebacker.
Taylor's not.
Taylor's not. Yeah. He's 265 pounds. Yeah. He's going to be the thing is, his agility numbers from the combine were about what Irvin's were. Well, 30 pounds heavier.
Yeah. Let's talk about these guys. I mean, Benson Mayowa, what he's going to do, and if he's in a reduced role, say 25% of the snaps, he's an ideal guy in that spot. You don't want to give a guy like Benson Mayowa 65, 70% of the snaps like we did at the beginning of last year. He wears down too quickly. We saw exactly kind of what that transpires into. A guy like L.J. Collier could be have an opportunity for one of those breakout players that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Yeah. A guy that can have an increased role, a guy that can slide inside. In fact, that's, I think, where they want him the majority of the time. That way Darrell Taylor can be on the outside, and they put their best front 7 on the field at all times. This group has a chance to be special.
I know when we were studying the draft 2 years ago, the first time that I was introduced to Darrell Taylor, somebody had tweeted a video of him turning the corner. And his lean and his ability to bend is unlike anybody else's on the roster. and was really a step above most of the other players in that draft. You could see the qualities on tape that the Seahawks were attracted to. Yeah. Now, obviously, the leg injury, kind of threw a wrench into their plans. But if this guy is right, and if they use him correctly, he has the biggest upside in this group, right?
He looks like Frank Clark. I mean, when you go look at him,
but Frank Clark,
even Frank didn't have that kind of bend, though. He just overpowered
guys around.
Yeah, and Frank Clark didn't have the agility and stuff to cover guys on the outside and play linebacker. Now he did throw people around and was just a monster, impossible to handle. But there's tape of Darrell Taylor doing that in college, where he just has that same ability, and then you include all the extra athleticism that allows him to drop in and play linebacker. I mean, the guy can be special.
And
I really think so.
The keys to this thing, and we haven't even talked about it yet, is Carlos Dunlap. Dunlap and Kerry Hyder are the guys that are going to draw attention. Now, Kerry Hyder's a real good cleanup guy. Yeah. He's a guy that's going to give you some activity on the outside, and he can rush from the 5, the 7, the 9. He can make some impacts, but he's really there to kind of clean up stuff, to contain the edge, to get some sacks, incidental sacks where everything's kind of pushed in. A guy like Carlos Dunlap is the key, and we saw that last year, the impact that Carlos can have on other guys on the roster, particularly Puna 4, because he's going to take those double teams. Puna's going to get single coverage. We saw that with Reed last year as well. Guys that can take advantage of those matchups, because Carlos is demanding some double teams, really has an impact. So, and then Alden Smith. If Alden Smith gets released from all his off the field type stuff, here's another guy that can have serious impact paired with Darrell Taylor over there at a strong side spot and come up and rush the passer on passing downs. The rotations, the matchup opportunities that the defense has this year with Ken Norton Jr. is unquestionably the best lineup that Ken's had to work with.
I think the other thing this group points out is just kind of the culture in Seattle and that Pete Carroll has built, and that you're able to attract all these guys and recruit them and convince them all that the best thing for their career is to play on a good team that has a chance to make the playoffs and make a deep run, but also where you're not going to get as many snaps. I mean, all these guys probably had other feelers or opportunities to go somewhere else where maybe they would have been more of the guy. And whereas, you're coming here and, hey, I'm sure they were open with these guys about, we're not just going to sign you, we're going to add this guy and this guy and this guy. And all these defensive end moves happened within about a 10-day period, if I recall. Like, you got to sell them on the big picture, and they were all able to do that, and we saw the impact that having that kind of depth has in the Super Bowl year. Let's go to the linebacker group. Bobby Wagner's still there, anchoring the middle. Jordan Brooks, a first-rounder from last year, really flashed in the second half last year, showed all those qualities that we all saw when they drafted him. It's funny how all the questions about whether he was the right pick in the first round, by the end of the season, those questions had become pretty muted, Yeah. And then Darrell Taylor potentially playing the outside. Cody Barton's there. He can play all three positions. After that, there's some depth issues. Still the question of whether or not KJ Wright might fit on this roster later on. Your thoughts overall on the linebacker group, Bill?
Bobby Wagner, what can you say? It's great to have him back. However, he's getting paid $17 million this year. Mm-hmm. Next year's cap hit is $20 million.
Yeah.
The team has to start thinking about some transition points, and I think you're starting to see that. You've got Bobby Wagner. Jordan Brooks has the ability to play middle linebacker. He's playing weak side linebacker this year. He's excellent at it. KJ Wright's not looking like he's going to rejoin the roster, although that possibility is there. Yeah. Darrell Taylor sounds, according to Pete Carroll, like he's going to be given every opportunity to take over that strong side linebacker spot. I'm really curious to see if Darrell Taylor's able to drop back into coverage with the recovery on the leg and cover tight ends, running backs, small receivers, etc. We'll see. And then coming up and having a big impact on the edge. Overall, I like the group. Of course, with Bobby there and Jordan Brooks, the blitzing ability added to that. We haven't even talked about Jamal Adams adding to that whole pass rush package we just talked about. that whole group right there has really got some upside. And you take a look at some of the young guys that they've talked about, undrafted guys, John Ratigan coming in as an undrafted guy. I think the team really likes him. The guy we pulled over from Germany on the what do we call it? The exchange program.
Yeah. He's an exchange student.
He's an exchange guy, right? Aaron Donker, and so we'll see how that group evolves. And then of course everyone's kind of discounting Cody Barton, myself as well. Darrell Taylor's already kind of been plugged into that hole. Brooks is on the other side. You got Wagner. What do you do with a guy like Cody Barton, who some think has earned an opportunity to maybe show a little bit more? Well, if he doesn't show early in training camp, I think he's going to be, again, regulated to a special teams role on the team, and we go another year without really knowing exactly what Cody Barton's all about.
Well, Cody Barton is a great special teamer. So let's, he has a spot on the roster that he can play all three linebacker positions. We know that he's got some athleticism and some speed. He's just not the athletic freak that Jordan Brooks is. So when they drafted him, he was thought of as the heir apparent to KJ Wright. And then Jordan Brooks came along. And you're like, well, you know what? Now we've got a guy who's significantly more athletic, and he's the fastest linebacker on the team. And that's only because Bobby Wagner's lost a step.
Yeah.
But Brooks just brings some incredible speed to that defense, and so you've got to play him. But Barton was thought of as that weak side linebacker. He had to play strong side his rookie year because of the injuries and everything, and he got overwhelmed over there because asking him to come up and set the edge and be more like a defensive end, he's way undersized for that. He's built as a weak side linebacker. That's where he should play. If he's going to be a regular player, a contributor on defense, it's going to have to be in that position. He's not built to be a every down middle linebacker or an every down Sam. He needs to be at the will, and so that's, I think, ultimately what he's going to be is, he's going to be the backup. But if Wagner goes down, Brooks will slide into the middle, Barton will come in on the edge, and you won't have Barton playing anything except for the will. And I think that is the right spot for him, being the fourth linebacker and a guy that can excel on one thing, but also is a great special teams guy, which is how you earn your roster if you're the fourth linebacker. It's how you earn your roster spot.
And it's how you earn your roster spot if you're the fifth linebacker, too, as Ben Burke-Curvin looks to be. And we won't spend a lot of time on him, the former Husky. I know how you feel about him. Probably just a special teamer, an emergency stopgap. Let me ask you this way, then, before we move on to the secondary, Keith. So if Cody's your super sub, he's a guy that can play all three positions, or in a pinch, if Wagner gets hurt, he can play the middle. If Brooks gets hurt, he can play the outside. Then you drop down to Curvin. You got Nate Evans, who's an interesting first-year guy that they plucked away from the Jaguars, but he's only an inside guy. And then you have the other two flyers undrafted. Are they a player short still? And I don't want to talk about KJ here, because KJ, I think, is a specific guy that can only play one position at this point in his career, one role the Seahawks would see him in, and I think the only door that opens there for him is if there's an injury. But with these guys we talk about, with Barton being the fourth guy, are they still a player short at linebacker?
It feels like it, but at the same time, they might not be if Alden Smith gets his legal stuff, because he's a Sam linebacker too, and so he will play in that same role. He'll be the backup to Darrell Taylor, and so if he's playing, then they're not a guy short. If his legal stuff doesn't get figured out, they might be. Burke-Curvin's going to probably be that guy because he was a very good special teams player as well. He's got some athleticism, he's got some speed, but he's really undersized.
Tackling machine, though, Keith.
Sure. I know he was in college, but that's not the NFL.
Didn't he have like 16 tackles in the last preseason game?
Something like that. But
come on,
he's not.
I'm a Coug, and even I like Burke-Curvin. How can you not pull for a guy like that?
Well, you're a Coug
because he's my size. That's how I pull for him, because he's like my size.
No, and I like him as a special teams player, and I think he's a good locker room fit. I just if he's pressed into a lot of defensive snaps on the field, I think your defense is in trouble.
What's Austin Calitro doing these days? Okay, let's talk secondary, and let's go safeties first, because there's so much to talk about at the cornerback position, and then we're going to bring Corbin in to get to the rest of this other rundown. safety's pretty set, right? I mean, we're not looking at any weird camp battles here.
I'm not so sure.
You've got Jamal Adams, you got Quandre Diggs, you have the roster. They still list Demarius Randall as a safety, although indications are they're going to play him outside.
Ryan Neal's
and then you have Ryan Neal, who was really kind of a revelation and really one of the fun unsung stories last year. As a guy that can make some plays. Diggs is in a contract year. Doesn't sound like he's going to hold out. We'll ask Corbin with his ear to the ground if there's anything going on there. Jamal Adams, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty here, but for the moment, let's just ignore contract issues and say that everybody shows up day one.
You've got your starters in Adams and Diggs. You've got Blair, who's going to get a lot of nickel. He's going to be the big nickel and be a safety / cornerback and play a lot.
And all indications are Marquise Blair will be ready to go day one.
Yes. And you got Ryan Neal, who is a very underrated, underappreciated guy that can play both positions and play corner, and just really played his tail off last year and looked pretty good. So I think you've got your four guys. So.
I'm intrigued to see. I mean, I hesitate to even talk about Blair as can we still talk about him in this group? I mean, the indications seem to be that he's sort of a nickel Swiss Army knife type guy.
He's an athlete. Mm-hmm. So, I think Pete Carroll treats him as such. They'll play him. They want to play him at free safety, but they also want to play him in the slot. Keith has mentioned the fact that he's athletic enough and has the coverage skills. He was the second in the Pac-12 his last year there in coverage rating.
Some have talked about a conversion to cornerback at some point in his career. Yeah,
well, because he's going to be in that mix because he's going to be the nickel, the big nickel, so he'll be safety / corner. But if they have corner problems, which we'll get to, it wouldn't be out of the question for him to just migrate and end up as the outside corner, and end up starting out there at some point later in the year. So he's got the talent to do it. They just like him in other roles. They want to be able to get more out of him than just. And
then last year, Adams with the 9.5 sacks, we know about that, most ever for safety. But that was out of necessity. When they brought him over, especially the first half of last season, when they couldn't generate any pass rush, they had to use him in that role. They had to blitz him a tremendous amount of the time. Second half, we didn't see much of that, or as much of that. Do you see him moving more into a more traditional strong safety type box safety role this year and maybe not coming off the edge as much?
I kind of do. I think that you're going to see he's not the same size, but you're going to see him play in a similar role to the way they use Cam Chancellor as a strong safety in the middle, covering at times, but just you're not throwing it over the middle without knowing where he's at, because if you don't know where he's at, you're going to get your receiver killed.
Yeah.
I think there's 3 or 4 guys that offer extreme scheme diversity that allow Jamal Adams to play his more natural position and give the team an opportunity to kind of use him in scheme diverse ways where it's not so obvious that they're going to throw him out there on a blitz. You've got Jamal Adams and Blair, who are both very athletic and can do similar things, both in coverage and the ability to hit you and really get physical with you. And then you've got Amadi that we haven't really talked about yet that gives them some opportunity in coverage underneath and in that dime and nickel role. And then and Neal and Brooks. So you've got Brooks, who's a very, very athletic linebacker as well, with a ton of speed, who's going to be able to play with a lot more instinct this year as opposed to thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
Gives the team really some athleticism in the box area that the team has lacked in the last few years.
Can we all agree that we will finally stop using the term Legion of Boom and stop talking about the Legion of Boom? When I see the national guys talk about the Seahawks secondary, it drives me crazy because they still use that term. But
there's not a single player
striking.
From the Legion of Boom on the roster.
Even and
there wasn't
just the way
either.
It's structured now. It's what's striking to me about this safety group and this secondary this year, but in particular the safeties, is how versatile they are. And you just talked about all the different guys. And Amadi, who can play the slot but was drafted as a free safety. Blair can play both positions and the slot. It's the book on the Seahawks defense, 13-14, they won the Super Bowl, and kind of those years they hung on to that afterwards, was we just play straight up. Vanilla, we're not hard to figure out, but we just execute. We do it with elite talent.
Yep.
It's not like that at all anymore. There's some talent back there, but what I feel like made that defense so much better in the second half is maybe this is Pete Carroll looking in the mirror a little bit, Ken Norton looking in the mirror a little bit, going, okay, self-scouting, how can I change? They started disguising things more, becoming less predictable, not just playing straight up as much anymore. And now it seems like they're going the other direction. They're drafting and acquiring guys that are versatile, that can play multiple positions. That this might be a different looking defense than we've seen since Pete Carroll arrived in Seattle.
Well, and that really, you were right. That really changed midway through the year. It wasn't just that they got guys back from injury and Adams and other guys, finally got healthy. There was a schematic shift defensively, and it was one that was kind of shocking for me because I never thought Ken Norton Jr. had it in him. He was not a guy that I ever looked to and to this is a guy who's going to be innovative, he's going to be creative, he's going to surprise, And then it was like a different person was coordinating the defense, and it became dynamic. It blitzed from different angles. They disguised coverages. They rolled coverages in ways that I hadn't seen, a Pete Carroll defense do. And they went from being historically bad defense in the first half, where they were giving up record yards and touchdowns and points and everything, to the top 3 defense by a lot of measures. At the second half, some of that was getting everyone healthy. Some of that was the schematic change. And if they hold on to the schematic change that they made and they continue with it, which I don't see any reason not to, it's going to be good for the defense.
I think the ability up front as well really helps that back end. So, for me, that was the huge difference last year, was acquiring Dunlap, getting everybody healthy, getting Jamal Adams into the scheme where everybody kind of knew what Jamal Adams was going to do. Diggs could depend on him to be in certain spots. I think earlier in the year, Quandre Diggs just didn't know what he was going to do. That led to mistakes from Griffin on coverage because I think both those guys were kind of hedging in certain directions. I think that really negatively impacted Trey Flowers. And so the whole defense really kind of struggled getting out of the gate. I think in the second half of the year, everybody kind of understood their assignments. Everybody kind of played true to the scheme, and it just kind of came together, in addition to the pass rush really kind of stepping forward and being effective. And I don't really see any reason why that can't continue with this group. In fact, it may even get better.
All right, you talk about coming together. Let's come together as a group and invite Corbin Smith in to join us. Take your position down there at the end. Corbin, managing editor of Seahawk Maven, SI.com, and also co-host along with Rob Rang of Locked On Seahawks podcast. Corbin just recently made the move to the area, right? You don't have to commute from Spokane anymore.
Yeah, no more sleeping in airports and all the fun stuff.
Welcome in. Before we get on with kind of some of the things we have planned for the rest of the show, you've been sitting listening to our positional breakdowns. Anything that you think that we missed, or any point that stood out to you of maybe a surprise that you've seen from attending the OTAs and the mini camps and some of the off-season practices and training camp up till this point? Anything stand out to you from what you've heard so far?
So I'll start on the offensive side because you guys are talking tight ends. And all these guys show up at these OTAs, especially second-year players. They look totally different because they know what to expect. Colby Parkinson, though, took that to another level. That dude is shredded. I mean, I was stunned just seeing how chiseled that guy. I mean, he looks like he's probably 265, 270, but he's a different 265, 270. So I'm curious to see, does that mean he's been hitting the weight room, obviously. Does that translate to him being better as an inline blocker? Because that was not an area that was a strength for him at Stanford.
Yeah.
But that, to me, is the role that he would play on this team, kind of like Tyler Higbee, where you can use him inline, but you also can spread him out to the slot. You can play him outside, use that athleticism at size, especially in the red zone. So he's a player that jumped out to me immediately. As far as the defense goes, Robert Kendiche, I'm only going to say so much because it was minicamp and OTAs.
Right.
But the passion that he was playing with, the energy that he was bringing, it really stunned me. And it was persistent throughout their off-season program. I don't want to jump on the hype train because this is Robert Candice, and normally the train goes off the tracks. But I'm having a hard time not buying a ticket because we're talking about an incredible talent at 296, 300 pounds, sub 4.9 40, and his ability to play 5-tech, 3-tech. They're going to be playing those bare fronts. You can move him all over the line. He can play any of those spots, and he's going to cause problems as long as he's motivated. That's going to be the key. The other name I'll throw out there at that position group, Cedric Latimer. We got to see him in the playoff game last year. Did he have some up and down reps? Yes. But he also made 2 huge run stops on 3rd down in the 4th quarter that really were the only reason the Seahawks kept in the game late. And he's a player that's a former basketball player, really athletic kid at around 300 pounds, and he hasn't really played that much football. I know Pete Carroll and his staff are pretty high on him, so I wouldn't just say Kim Diche's got that roster spot just yet. I think that Lattimore is a guy to watch. He had 6 tackles in that playoff game. He's a guy that could offer some pass rushing upside with his athleticism. Clint Hurd has shown he can coach up those undrafted guys.
Yeah.
He could be that next player that takes a big leap in his 2nd season. You could have him, Monet, and Poona Ford all on your 53-man roster as former undrafted players.
Okay. We could probably talk for another half an hour about the positional breakdowns, but we have some other things to get to. Just so you know, our over-under on trying to get through this first segment and getting into Corbin was an hour. We're only 21 minutes over. We're doing okay. Next up, we're going to talk about potential breakout players. One on offense, one on defense for each of us. And I'm going to start with Keith. We'll work our way around. And let's do offense first, and then we'll come back around and do defense. Keith, who's a guy, and obviously we've kind of gone through the roster already ad nauseum a little bit, so it may be we may be a little repetitive here. But who's a guy that you see that maybe isn't getting all the publicity that you think could have a breakout year on offense for the Seahawks?
So I think Freddie Swain is a guy that I know you kind of discounted him. He's like, oh, he doesn't do anything great. He's a guy that can, but he should make the roster just because he has experience and all that. You go back and look at the, 21 catches he had last year. Mm-hmm. Almost all of them were in the script, right? They were when they were in the script, the first 10, 15 snaps of the game. Wilson was finding him. He was getting open. He was getting plays. When they would go off the script and Schottenheimer, got stuck on one play and it was throw it deep every, DK for the next 50 plays, then Freddie Swain disappeared because he wasn't, part of that. But on the script, he was productive. And I think that given a competent offensive coordinator that's going to keep, that level of play call throughout the game, you're going to see him get more opportunities, and that production's going to come with it.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought about going in one or two directions, and I may because I'm that way. I like to bring more than one player into these conversations. I'm going to go with Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny, we've been waiting. We've been waiting for Rashad Penny to come to the front and stay there, but he's been unable to stay there because of injury. And I think if Rashad Penny has an opportunity to in this offense to rise up and be the player that we all expected him to be coming out of college, he could have a tremendous impact on this offense, given the role that he could have paired with Chris Carson to really impact the play calling, to have an opportunity to at one time. Rashad Penny was even in positioning himself to take over Chris Carson's primary role as the number one running back.
I think that was the assumption 2 years ago, probably, is that Carson would get to the end of his deal and then they would hand it off to Penny.
And it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
But
it
the
was
talent,
very close.
The talent is there. The talent is there. The opportunity could be there if he shows that consistency. And he's definitely on my radar for my breakout player because of just the opportunity. Now, if he seizes it, it's only going to be beneficial to the team. I think the shared load with Chris helps Chris because Chris breaks down over time. We've seen Chris only be able to stay healthy 12 to 14 games a year Chris has a hard time doing that. They kind of meter him as far as a workload is concerned. And so there is definitely an opportunity to have an impact. The other guy I would mention just briefly is Ethan Posik.
Okay.
Nobody's talking about Ethan Posik as kind of having a breakout year. He started 15 out of 16 games last year, 14 out of 16 games. But nobody really notices the center position on a team. It's kind of an afterthought. He's stuck between a couple of potential Pro Bowl players. Yeah. But he could really have an impact on this scheme, on the blocking scheme, on the way that Russell Wilson is protected, and the way that the running backs have success.
It's interesting. Pro Football Focus did a list of breakout players, potential breakout players at every position based on their grading system, and they had Posik as the center, but they kind of hedged it, and they said, well, we're sort of grading on a curve. Center, there weren't a lot of candidates, so he's a guy that we kind of like, but only to a certain extent. I think I know what your answer is going to be, Corbin. Who's your potential breakout player on offense?
So I might have gone with Penny. Just because, as you mentioned, and I've said this since he was drafted, I mean, I watched him in person at San Diego State, an incredible talent. And you can't say that we haven't seen that talent on the field. Those 2 games before he tore his ACL, he was pushing for Chris Carson's job at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you could see him catching the ball, his ability the home run threat speed that he has. They don't have another running
the Philly game, I just remember he looked like he had arrived.
The afterburners. Mm-hmm. They don't have another running back that can do that. If he's healthy, then he could do that again for him this year, and he could make life miserable for other teams. But you mentioned Freddie Swain. I'm going to go with one of his competitors, a guy that has really blown me away going back to last training camp. He surprised people making the roster last year. If you were at camp, it shouldn't have surprised you. Penny Hart. And the thing that really jumps out to me about Penny Hart is the rapport that he has with Russell Wilson. It's almost like they have a telepathic relationship on the practice field. You can see it in OTAs and minicamp. And he just seems to know when he's going to come in and out of his breaks. He's got the football waiting for him. And Penny Hart is a savvy route runner. He runs faster than his combine time suggests. Gutsy kid, had 4 tackles on special teams last year. You want that 4th or 5th receiver job, you better be able to play special teams. And Pete Carroll said this after minicamp. We trust him. Russell Wilson trusts him. I think he is a player that Freddie Swain's going to be going up against him. I could see those two, and even throw Dwayne Eskridge in there, 3, 4, and 5, your pecking order. I think Penny Hart has played himself at least into consideration there. They've got some other rookies that could contend too, like Cade Johnson, but Penny Hart just keeps impressing. And you get to a point where I know it's practice, but you keep doing this over and over again, you start to think that this is legitimate. He's got a legitimate rapport, chemistry with Russell Wilson.
Let me ask you this. So you've seen him at practice. You've seen him stand next to other players. They have him listed at 5'8", 180. What is he really?
That's about right. Yeah, I think that
I've heard some people think he's 5'6", 5'7".
Yeah, by NFL terms, I'd say 5'8" is just about right. Yeah, but I mean, he made a catch in minicamp that I know that the defensive backs can't play the football because of rules, but end zone one-handed catch, the defense was all over him as much as they could be. One-handed reeled it in, and you looked around, and some of the beat reporters that never show emotion were sitting there like, whoa. And it was an incredible catch, but he was doing that throughout their offseason program. And at last training camp, he was fantastic, especially the second half. I thought Cody Thompson had an edge in that race the first week or so, and then he got hurt. And Penny Hart capitalized. I think he's going to have a big training camp for them. I really do.
It's interesting. Well, we're talking about little receivers. I thought long and hard about my breakout guy being Dwayne Eskridge because I think they drafted him in the second round. In a year, they only had 3 picks. They targeted him. They really
that's cheating, Dan.
He's
never even played an NFL game. How can you call him a breakout?
Because that's how you break out. But you've talked about the guy that I'm going with, and I think Colby Parkinson is such a unique talent. And I'm curious, and maybe you can shed some light on this if you've seen anything in practice where they've used him in this role. I've heard some speculation that he could potentially, in addition to his traditional tight end duties, be used as a big slot in that Cooper Kupp role with how they use Kupp on the inside with the Rams. But a guy, if you imagine 6'7", with that catching radius, with his hands and his ability to catch the football, what a red zone factor he could be. I think there's a role for him, and I think I hope to see. We've yet to see Shane Waldron call a game, and we're going to talk about Waldron in a minute. But if if they carve out a consistent role for him and make him a regular part of the weekly game plan, there's not a lot of teams in the league that can account for a 6'7" pass catching tight end that can run like he can
in the red zone.
Yeah, and with a year under his belt, and kind of he had to struggle through the injury early last year, and things you've told me and shed some light on it today. I really like Parkinson as a guy that can maybe bust out.
I will say this: all 4 tight ends that they have atop their depth chart, and I'm going to throw Tyler Mavery in that mix. I actually considered him for this question because Tyler Mavery was maybe the biggest surprise in training camp last year. The guy that didn't have much production at Buffalo or Maryland at college level, but he made a play in the mock scrimmage, their second mock scrimmage. Quandre Diggs is a Pro Bowl safety. He hurtled over him after the catch.
That got a lot of buzz, yeah.
And I know it was just one play, but he was really good throughout training camp.
Yeah.
But all 4 of those tight ends, you can move around. Will Dissley can go into the backfield. You can play him sometimes out of that slot. You prefer him in line, but Parkinson you can move around. Jared Everett can play all over the field.
Yeah.
Tyler Mavery can play all over the field. So they've got a lot of flexibility with that position group that I don't think they necessarily had last year. They tried to force the issue with Jacob Hollister. He was never going to be an H-back with his build and his style. That's just not the way he plays. But all 4 of their top tight ends now can do that.
All right, let's talk defense. Breakout player, Bill, a guy that you see kind of stepping up and getting some headlines?
Yeah, the defense is very fun.
Yeah, there's a few more directions you can go here.
There's a number of guys that you could really legitimately talk about here, but I'm going to go with Marquise Blair. Marquise Blair is a guy that Pete Carroll has singled out as a guy that he's excited about. He's talked about him at press conferences. He says he's going to have a big impact. He's going to play a big role. I believe Pete. I think Marquise Blair was set up for that role last year before the ACL after in that second game. And I believe that by the end of training camp that primary nickel role is going to be his. Now, what does that do to Ugo Amadi? I'm just not sure. They just have so many guys, so many young guys that can make an impact on that roster. But Marquise Blair is a guy that I don't think that you can leave off the field. I really think that he's going to have that impact. I think they're able to move him around on the field, scheme-specific situations, guys in coverage that he matches up well against. So I think that they use him as a weapon in a similar way that they would use Jamal Adams as a weapon, moving him around, different guys, lining him up in situations that can take care of advantage of his athleticism. And he's a guy that I think really has an opportunity to break out.
Keith?
Man, this is hard because there's a lot of guys that I want to talk about.
It's Ben Burke-Irvin for you, isn't it?
Absolutely not. It's really not. We continue to make this joke, but actually, he is such a good special teamer. I hope he makes the roster.
We'll talk about special teams later.
I want him on the, but no, like I said, there's a lot of guys that deserve mention here. But I'm going to pick Alton Robinson, the defensive end. 5th round pick a year ago, got more playing time than I think anyone expected last year because of injuries and everything. He flashed at times, had I think 4 or 4.5 sacks. But I'll tell you, his first step coming off the snap reminds me of Michael Bennett. It's that quick. He has.
Does he stay awake in meetings?
I hope so, because if he doesn't, he won't be on the roster. But his first step is really, really good. He's big. He's physical. I think the guy has a chance to actually be kind of special. And seen the flashes of it last year. It's year 2 when defensive linemen tend to make that big jump, and I'm expecting him to make that big jump this year.
I have a question for you before we move on. So you take a look at Alton Robinson. Last year he made, 20-25% of the snaps. Had that 4.5 sacks. Where do you see him getting those snaps this year, given the overall roster at that defensive end spot?
Oh, he's still going to be he's going to get a little bit more. I think he's going to be Dunlap's primary backup. I know that people will say Mayoa, but honestly, he's bigger, stronger, faster,
do you think
Benson
Mayoa makes the roster?
It's not guaranteed. I think he is one of those guys that there are just so many good quality players at the defensive end positions, unless you count L.J. Collier as a tackle, because he's going to play a lot of 3-tech.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about Rasheem Green. How does he make the roster?
Right.
That's a tough
And
group.
maybe Corbin could speak to that a little bit.
God, I mean, it's anyone's guess what's going to happen there, because we've seen he's another guy. There have been flashes on the practice field, and he's got versatility.
That Kyler Murray play, I'll still to this day, I remember that's one of the most impressive athletic plays I've seen by a defensive end in a long time.
And the interesting thing about Alton Robinson is that when all the Julio Jones rumors were going around, that is a player that I had been told that the Falcons might have interest in. The Seahawks
we
were
actually
serious.
talked about that.
And I actually thought that makes a lot of sense with the depth they've got at the position. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much he's going to end up playing. I'm going to go to the secondary with a newcomer, free agent signing. I think of Keller Witherspoon. I'm still very high on him. When he was coming,
That's what I
out
get
of
for going
college,
last.
There's a few other guys I could have gone
One of the
with.
guys I wanted to talk about when I said there was a bunch.
You watch the film and it drives you nuts, because there are games where it's like, this guy doesn't look like he's played football.
Yeah.
And then the last 4 games last year, he looks like a borderline all-pro caliber player. He gave up a touchdown in that Week 17 game against the Seahawks, but he really held DK Metcalf in check most of that game. And he's got incredible size, 6'3", got 33-plus inch arms, outstanding athlete, and he hasn't really played a ton of football. He was a guy that got into the game late in high school. So he's improved as a tackler. That was atrocious his first couple of years in the league. And he's going to a team where if you don't tackle at that position, you're not playing.
Yeah.
I just think he's wanted to play for Seattle since the draft process. They brought him in for a pre-draft visit. This is where he wanted to be. The system is very similar to what he was doing at San Francisco. I think you put him across from DJ Reed. That's my prediction for your 2 starters right there. You could have 2 totally different body types there, but a lot of similarities in how they play the game, though. They both bring the toughness and physicality. You just need to see more consistency from Keller Witherspoon. I think you see it in this scheme. I was impressed with what I saw, the little bit I was able to look at in their OTAs, with it being OTAs, but I think he's got a chance to be a player that really banks on his prove-it year, and then the Seahawks are going to have to figure out what they do next year as far as free agency goes.
Yeah, and whenever you talk about a potential breakout player, you got to talk about opportunity, and that's a word that came up a lot with your Rashad Penny example, and that's why I'm going to go with Darrell Taylor, and we talked extensively about him at the defensive end position, but I think a guy that he's going to get the opportunity, and when you combine that with the fact that they moved up to get him high in the draft in the second round a year ago, and coming off the injury, he looks 100% healthy. We've heard the glowing reviews about him in off-season training camp, and he's going to get the opportunity not only to play maybe as one of the primary outside linebackers on this team, but also in situations coming off the edge. It wouldn't surprise if this guy's truly 100% healthy, if that leg is right, and if the head is right to go along with it, because we've heard some things about how the hesitation to play him late last year had nothing to do with the leg. Pete Carroll even came out and said that, and there was a moment there where I kind of felt like there's a little bit of edge from Pete, where he was saying, look, we think the guy's ready to go, and the reason he's not has nothing to do with the leg. If he's right in the head and in the leg, he's going to get the opportunity. It wouldn't surprise me. This kid could lead the team in sacks, because he's going to get the chance in situations to come off that edge, either from the linebacker situation or out wide or as a Leo. And we've already talked. I don't want to be too repetitive. We've talked about just the quick twitch and the ability to bend and lean and get around that edge. Darrell Taylor could have a real significant breakout season for the Seahawks this offseason. This is going to be fun. We're going to play. We certainly didn't make this segment up, but we're going to steal the heck out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to call this buy or sell, and we can just go around, and we've kind of each come up with a few, and we didn't discuss these ahead of time, so some of them may be repetitive, but we'll just kind of go around and I'll start, and we'll make a statement. It could be outlandish, it could be reasonable or realistic, and then we'll discuss whether it's realistic or not, whether we would buy it or sell it if we were stockbrokers, I guess. I'll say this. We've talked a lot about the wide receiver position, DK Metcalf, and all the focus is on him. And they draft Dwayne Eskridge in the second round. And they've got the tight end group. And they're going to spread the ball around, get it out quick. I say Tyler Lockett leads the team in receptions after all is said and done. Bill, buy or sell?
I'll buy that. Yeah, I think ideally suited for Shane Waldron offense to get open in space. He's Russell Wilson's proven dependable target. There's a lot of trust between those two. I'm buying.
Keith?
I'll buy that. He led the team in receptions last year. He didn't lead the team in yards. That went to Metcalf, but he led the team in receptions, and I think that's a similar situation that we're going to see this year. He's going to get a lot of catches. There are going to be a lot of 7, 8, 9-yard receptions in this offense because it's going to be a lot more quick hitting. But I think his receptions will come.
I'm going to sell, and here's why. Dwayne Eskridge. Get another somewhat similar target in some regards. It's going to be running around outside the slot and stuff. I think DK Metcalf leads this team in receptions. Okay. He's 23. He has just scratched the surface of his potential. And I think you put him in an offense, Shane Waldron, he's already said he's running some different routes.
Yeah.
You get him to be more refined in that area, I don't know how you defend him. So you don't. I think it's going to be close because Tyler Lockett is going to get a lot of targets. He's going to get a lot of receptions. But I actually think this is the year DK passes him, in part because there's more repetitiveness with Eskridge's game to Lockett, whereas Metcalf, he's a unicorn.
Yeah.
There's nobody else like him. So.
If I couldn't be any more excited about the Seahawks offense, just listening to that
right.
About DK Metcalf, I've already unchained him from my own perceptions and my own.
He's still so raw.
Oh, it's just amazing.
And the work ethic is the incredible work ethic that he has there too. The sky truly is the limit with that kid.
It's interesting talking about Eskridge and how he fits into this, and the reason I say that with Tyler is, and I'm making assumptions here, and we won't know until we see it. What Tyler's been able to accomplish so far in his career, earning a third contract from the Seahawks, has been remarkable. When you consider too how they've pigeonholed him. I mean, the guy either runs post or flag routes, or he runs an out. And what I really hope we see in this Shane Waldron offense is that he gets some of those Robert Woods routes, right? He gets some of those crossing routes. He gets an opportunity to catch the ball with some chance to gain some yards after the catch. And so I'm really excited to see how that.
And that would be my argument with Metcalf too. You're going to see it. Not that he needs a huge route tree, because he doesn't. I mean, his one trick is a really, really good trick.
It's being 6'5" and
I
freaky.
think that there are some things you can do with him that, quite frankly, Brian Schottenheimer did not try to do.
And I think we've seen some glimpses of that. You've seen DK Metcalf get open in space and what he's capable of in small.
But it was never emphasized, and I think Shane Waldron will do that. So.
He just has to catch the football. I'm trying to remember the game last year. He had a huge game. It was a 2-touchdown game, over 100 yards, but he dropped 2 balls that would have made it about a 250-yard game. One of them was a crosser where he could have kept running, probably would have scored on, and he laid the football on the ground. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. Bill, give us a buy or sell.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Goes against what you talked about earlier with Akello. Trey Flowers leaves camp, having beat out Akello Witherspoon for the starting left corner spot.
I'm going to sell on that one. I think Flowers, he's going into the last year of his contract. He's kind of reached that point. They went and got Witherspoon because they don't trust him. I think he did get better last year. He started out, when he first came in, he had just been hurt. It was kind of rough. As the year went on, he got better. I think there is reason to be hopeful. But until I see it consistently, I'm not buying it. And I think Witherspoon has a chance to be really good.
Corbin.
Well, obviously, with what I said with Witherspoon, I don't expect that Flowers is going to be starting, so I'm going to be selling this. I think he has a better chance of not making the team than he does of starting.
Yeah, that's exactly the response.
The reason I'm saying this is I'm just hedging bets based partially on what a few of the players have said about Pierre Desir as well, coming in. A player the Seahawks know well that hasn't had – his last 2 years have not been as good, but he – played really well in camp for them in 2017. He had a great year, borderline Pro Bowler in Indy. So
I thought he should have made the team. I was torn when they released him that year.
And this is not being overly critical of Flowers because I think he did get better last year. The stats bear that out. The film bears it out. I just don't know with the guys they've brought in, especially with Trey Brown, if he's going to be on the team, a guy that they're very high on already. I just don't know if there's a spot there for him. I definitely don't see him starting.
It speaks to the
unless
depth
there's
on this
injuries.
team that that's the first mention of Trey Flowers an hour and 45 minutes into the show, and he did get better and played better last year, and he's still young, and he's long and athletic.
And Demarius Randall has
Demarius
started
Randall
a lot
playing
of games
corner.
at
Yeah.
in this league.
Well-
So there's a lot of names we can keep throwing
Yeah.
out.
Well, but here's the situation. Here's what I was thinking when I wrote down the question. And I heard this a little bit in the offseason, is that he's working really hard. And you never know what a guy is willing to do
When they're pushed to the brink.
when they're pushed
Yeah.
into a spot where he knows he's going to have to fight for his life. And what does that show up as? Does that show up as him wilting? Or
No.
does that show up as him coming in with a completely different confidence that we just haven't seen yet, coming into his fourth year and emerging as a guy
Yeah.
that all of a sudden demands to be the guy? And I don't know.
Well, we'll see. That could be why he stepped up and played better last year, because it wasn't his spot. He had to earn it. Got one for us, Keith?
All right. Jamal Adams has a new contract before week 1. Are you buy or sell?
Let's go clockwise, Corbin.
Bye. I could be wrong on this. I still think a deal gets done early in training camp, and it could even happen before they actually take the field. That has been the sweet spot. There have been some negotiations. It's been slower than Seattle wants, but I still, based on what I've been told, I would hedge bets he's going to have a contract. The Seahawks, they have to get it done.
Yeah.
So I think it gets done, and I think he's at camp, and he's ready to go by week 1. They're going to slow play that because he's coming back from those surgeries, but he's going to be ready to go in week 1, and he'll have a new deal.
That's why I'm buying it, too. I think the Seahawks, they're always tough in negotiations. I think they know how far they're willing to go, but I think they also understand that he kind of has the leverage right now, and that it's more important to have him there day one than it is to save another $500,000 annually, or even $1 million annually, and that ultimately they'll come to a deal before day one.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'm prepared to argue a different position on that, but I think the reality is the Seahawks do a really good job in securing their top end talent. John Schneider's talked about guys that can tilt the field. Jamal Adams is that guy, and they secure that and make sure that they take care of a player like that. I think it shows and signals the rest of the roster that they're going to do whatever it takes to win a Super Bowl.
This roster is built to win. It's built to win this year, and they made some aggressive moves this offseason to make that happen in a very competitive, maybe the best division in football. They can't risk that by having one of their most impactful players hold out. Corbin, you got one for us?
Yes, I do. Buy or sell, Marquise Blair leads the team in interceptions.
Ooh. You know what? I'll buy that because, and this is assuming he's 100% healthy. We've talked about the versatility, and we've heard Pete talk about how much they value that and what a weapon they think he can be. And I think this is a guy very similar to Jamal Adams, in a guy that I think Pete just the eyes get big and he starts to slobber a little bit when he starts thinking about schemes and how they can game plan with this guy and do things with him and match up and put him in a position to make those plays. I'll say this. I think generally one of the things we need to see from this defense we haven't seen the last couple of years is they have to make plays. If there's one thing this team has lacked, even when they've been productive on the field, other than they did increase the sack totals near the end of last year, they've had opportunities to make plays on the football and failed to make them. I can think of a dropped pick 6 by Jamal Adams in the Jets game last year. It might have been the same game with Amadi with the same thing. And being in position, not making plays. Marquise Blair is a playmaker. That's what he showed in college. It's what he showed flashes of before he got hurt. And for that reason, if they put him in position to do that, I can see that. I'm going to buy that.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the well with the Keller Witherspoon on this answer because we do have some playmakers on this team, guys that have the ability, if they can get in position, to make the plays, not drop the ball. We saw that from DJ Reed. We've seen that from Quandre Diggs, a guy that can make interceptions. Witherspoon is that guy. He's a guy that can get himself into position. He high points the ball. He can catch the ball. He's not a guy that's going to have stone hands with an opportunity. So I think he's positioned to be effective as a guy that can make plays on the ball and interceptions. And he plays a position that's going to put him in a prime spot to take advantage of that. So I'm going with Witherspoon on this.
So I'm going to sell as well, and the reason I'm going to sell on that is going to be Quandre Diggs, and a lot of it's situation. Because of free safety, what he's going to do, but also because I expect this offense to score a lot of points, and so opposing offenses are going to be trying to keep up with Seattle, so they're going to be throwing deep more than their talent says they should, and when they do that, the free safeties tend to feast, and so I'm going to go with Quandre Diggs as the guy who's going to lead the league in interceptions, but honestly, that was a good one because
the league or the team.
I made the prediction. I made the prediction on our podcast last week that I think Blair will lead the team, and I'm basing this off of how he played in training camp last year. They were moving him all over the place, and he's got really good ball skills. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I think he had an interception in almost every single practice, at least one. And then you'd blitz him off the edge, and he'd get sacks. They'd blow the whistle, obviously, but he was getting forced fumbles, the mock scrimmage games. He was just all over the place. If he's healthy, that's the big X factor here. But Diggs would be my second choice just because I think Quandre Diggs, this is a statement I made a few weeks ago that drew a little bit of some fans didn't like it so much. Jamal Adams, I think, is the better player. I think Quandre Diggs is more important to Seattle's defense, though, from a schematic standpoint. That free safety position, you remember what it looked like when Earl Thomas was not back there injured and they didn't have Quandre Diggs there. So I think from a schematic standpoint, having that center fielder that can close off doors to those post routes, the seam route and stuff, is highly critical. So another free agent they need to get locked up.
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned.
A few of those on that back end next year. Next offseason is going to be interesting. We can have a 4-hour show next offseason just about the secondary.
Probably.
Okay, let's do this. We've talked about some of these things already, but Rashad Penny. Jesus.
I don't think the announcers did that.
Buy or sell.
Buy or sell on whether there's an R in his name or not.
Dan Vians gets Rashad Penny's name right.
Rashad Penny will have over 800 yards from scrimmage.
Oh,
Bill.
From scrimmage, yeah. I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy that because I had a very similar buy or sell. My question was, will Rashad Penny supplant Chris Carson as the number one running back by the end of the year? And I think that's actually, and it all comes down to the health. We've talked about it over and over again, and we can say it forever. But if he does, if he plays in all 17 games, he could definitely, along with, and I pose this question to you, Dwayne Eskridge or Rashad Penny, who has the more yards from scrimmage? And it could definitely be Rashad Penny because of the ability to impact the game from the receiver standpoint out of the backfield. And he could start to earn carries from Chris Carson to where he starts impacting Chris Carson's ability to stay on the field. So I'm buying.
Keith?
I'm going to sell. I want to buy. I really do. But my...
You got to be smart with his money.
Yeah, it comes down to if there was I also have a Rashad Penny question. A statement is one of mine, but even that came with the qualifier. If healthy all season,
right?
Does Penny Penny has more yards than Carson? But the whole if healthy all season is such the big if.
Which is crazy because when the Seahawks drafted him and the whole thing with they didn't have a second-round pick that year, and was he overdrafted, and were there other guys? There was Nick Chubb behind him, and there were some other guys that, in retrospect, would have been easier to have, or was running back even a need, should they have gone a different direction there. The reason they used, or one of the reasons they used to justify taking him is based on all their analytics. He was the most durable running back in that draft.
Yeah, he hadn't gotten hurt in college.
Yeah,
he had a huge.
And granted,
workload.
not the highest level of play, being at San Diego State, but still Division I, and that was what all their analytics guys were telling him is this guy is, and that was coming off the CJ Procise thing, and they were kind of battered and bruised from that whole experience and had a sour taste in their mouth, and so maybe they overestimated that, and then he's been nothing, and. This goes into it. I struggle sometimes, and even with Procise, up until the last year he was with us, some guys are truly injury prone because they're brittle and they just can't take the pounding, and some guys are just unlucky. And I feel like Penny has been unlucky up until this point.
None of his injuries are related.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a chance that if he is healthy that he could do this.
Well, if he is healthy for most of the season, all 17 games, it could be a 14-game season. I think he breaks that. I honestly do. I'm hedging my bets a little bit about his injury, just because, he's going into year 4. He hasn't played much in the previous 3 years.
Corbin?
I'm going to sell, but I think it's going to be very close if he's healthy. Again, that's the big caveat here. But I'm really intrigued. I said this the day they hired Shane Waldron. If you are going to be doing more under center sets, which I anticipate they are going to be, and they're going to run more wide zone, Rashad Penny, that's his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
He should be, I heard you argue, I don't know that he's better than Chris Carson in wide zone, but I think they're equal.
I think his talent is better suited because he has that speed.
Explosiveness. Yeah.
He's not going to get run down from behind. So
yeah, and I look at that and the fact that he came from San Diego State where they did under center almost all the time. That is only going to play to his strengths. This is the perfect scheme for him to have that breakout year.
Yeah.
And Chris Carson's had his share of injury issues, and other than ACL for Penny, the ones with, Carson's had a number of different ones. It seems like all the injuries for Penny have been linked together. So I do have to agree with you that the bad luck standpoint seems to be biting him more than anything. So if he's healthy, I think he's close. I'd say 700 to 750 yards is absolutely attainable. If he managed to play the entire season and somehow without playing Carson, then he could blow by 800 yards easily. He has the talent to do it. I'm hesitant to buy on that one just because he's been snake bit so bad by the injuries. So,
Bill, what do you got next?
I got a big one. Russell Wilson wins the league MVP award in 2021, having thrown for 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, and leads Seattle to a 14-3 record. The best record.
Do we have to buy all of those?
The most wins. Yeah, buy all of that. The most wins in a single season.
What if he wins the MVP and he has 44 touchdowns?
Come on, you got to go all in.
I've got a mortgage payment to make. This is not fair. Having all this.
Keith, you get to go first.
I'm going to sell.
Okay.
And it's not just because there's way too many details in that statement that all would have to be true for me to buy, but I'm going to sell in that Russell Wilson still plays for the Seahawks, and he doesn't play for an East Coast team that's going to be given all of the opportunity to win those awards, even if with a less deserving player. Mm-hmm. And if it comes down as it's close, I think he loses because, of just Seattle and market. And that's the only reason why I would sell.
Corbin?
I kind of want to just do like a down payment because I think there's a decent chance for the MVP I said this last year, but I'm going to say it again. I think this is the best supporting cast that Russell Wilson has ever had. You've got a dynamic, athletic tight end in Gerald Everett that you're adding. Dwayne Eskridge is dynamite in the run and passing game. If you know how to use him, and I think Shane Waldron's going to know how to use him. Gabe Jackson was a fantastic addition. Mm-hmm. The guy has been one of the best. I don't know how he's never made a Pro Bowl, to be honest with you, as good of a pass protector as he has been for almost a decade. Part of it's probably playing for bad teams. They've only made the playoffs once in his career. So he's going to have an upgrade in the pass protection. He has no reason to make an excuse. There's no reason for excuses. You've got the pieces around you. You've got a coordinator that you helped handpick. So I think Wilson's got a really good chance to be right in the mix there with those weapons to be an MVP candidate. I can't buy 14-3, though. I could see him getting to 12 or 13 wins, but in the NFC West, no way. I just can't see it. This division is just too brutal.
It is brutal.
I'll say this. I think you make a good point. Well, first of all, if Russ was sitting here, he'd buy because we all know that I think winning the MVP someday is very important to him.
He just isn't going to – he's not going to emphasize it.
Very important to him. And those around him have even said in stories, that he wants to win the MVP. It's his best opportunity yet. And if it doesn't happen this year, then it may never happen. I think if he buys in 100% to Shane Waldron's offense, and if he improves that area of his game, which is getting the ball out quicker, spreading it around, just taking what the defense gives him more.
Middle of the field.
Being more Tom Brady-ish. We've heard so much about this offseason drama and how it started when he watched the Super Bowl, and he watched Brady win another Super Bowl. And what has Brady made a career out of, and a Hall of Fame career, and being maybe the greatest of all time? It's he's always willing to give. If the defense is giving you something, he'll continue to pound away at that thing until you stop it, even if it's boring to the fans and boring to him. If Russ can buy into that aspect, then I think he'll have an opportunity. So I would like to buy. I'm going to sell because of this. For some reason, the national media and the people that vote on MVP have there's some sort of stigma that surrounds Russell Wilson. And I can see that even if they have a great year and they win 14 games and the offense is really efficient, it's really consistent, and he puts up big numbers, that maybe Waldron gets the credit for that. And if a guy like Matthew Stafford, who changed situations, and he goes and throws 45 touchdowns for the Rams and they win 12 games and they're runner-up and they're a wild card team or whatever, that a guy like that could end up winning it instead. Or if Brady throws 40 touchdowns again, they'll just anoint him one more time. It's for some reason he seems to face an uphill battle with the national media. That's the only reason I would sell. But the opportunity is certainly there.
Good answer.
All right. That's what I'm here for. That's why I'm here. Keith?
So I'll stick in the same realm. So that Russell Wilson will be sacked 32 times or less over the course of this year. And I use that number 32 because the lowest sack total of his entire career was 33 back in his rookie season.
Okay, so
how many
buy is
attempts did he
good,
have, though?
right? Buy is good.
Buy is that he will have less sacks.
Okay.
He will set a record for the least number of sacks in his career.
Corbin.
I'm going to sell. I think it's very close, but that extra 17th game is what really does it for me here. Because we know all it takes is one game where maybe even the pass protection is holding up, but Russ just really wants to get the plays downfield. He's ad-libbing, and then he gets sacked 5 times that game. If you have one extra one of those, it's going to be really hard. I think 33, 34, 35 sacks attainable. I don't know. 32 just seems a little bit low to me. So even though I like the line, and I think Gabe Jackson's an outstanding addition, I do maybe still have a few questions at right tackle. Can we see the Brandon Shell from the first half of last year for a whole season? He's had injury issues throughout his career. And Cedric Latimer, those last 3 games last year, I don't know that Pete Carroll was necessarily kidding about him getting to compete for that job.
Yeah.
And not having him play in the playoff game when Shell was not close to 100%. I've said this a few times this offseason. I think if Cedric Latimer plays that game, the Seahawks advance. I'm going to go that far. Because Shell was not close to 100%. And he was just getting manhandled off the edge throughout that game. So there are still a few question marks for me. I think this is a much better line overall with Gabe Jackson. I just don't know about 32 sacks. Yeah. It seems a little low for me.
Well, I'll say this, first of all, as the guy who kind of put the rundown together and pieced some of this together, it's my fault. I'm sorry. I neglected to mention that there would be no math. But then Corbin had to come in.
Hey, I was a teacher. I can handle the math.
I went to Washington State. I had to take 1 math class to graduate. I was expecting no math. But if you take that out of the equation,
teacher guys here just love this.
If we break, I'll say this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say if you break it down and you go and you prorate it right by per game, I think the sack numbers will be better. And I hope they are, because I talked before about it has to work. Like this pairing has to work. But I do think it'll be better. I think generally, if I can kind of weasel out of this, I think generally people will look at this season, the way it's built, the way they structured it, going out and getting Gabe Jackson, making some of the moves on the offensive line, and then the move to bring in Waldron and tweak the offense a little bit is constructed to cut down on that number, and I think they'll succeed at that. I'm optimistic about that.
Man, if they fail at that, we're in trouble.
We're in trouble, and we're going to have a whole different show next year in Phoenix.
Yeah, we're having a completely different conversation, because I agree with Keith, but not on the number. That number is just a little low. I think that given the fact that we're going to have more opportunities, we're going to be higher efficient in our offense, we're going to convert more third downs, we're going to have more opportunity to be on the field. Just that alone, I think, gives us an opportunity to take more sacks Not overall. I think our sack totals come down, but I do believe it's going to be closer to 40, not 32. So I'm selling.
Who's next? I think Corbin?
So I'm going to go to the defensive line for this one. A couple of you guys mentioned the interior pass rush being key. 2 players that can rush from outside and inside. L.J. Collier and Kerry Hyder combined for 12 sacks.
Wow.
Okay.
Hyder had 8.5 last year.
He did, but he also has had a roller coaster career with sacks.
Yeah, he had
Absolutely.
two
And
the
that
previous
was,
year.
he was kind of pressed into that role because they lost everyone else.
Yeah.
Not just Nick Bosa, but kind of everyone else. That's an interesting one. And I think a lot of it will depend on, we talk about Collier, and is he going to play outside? Is he going to play that base end, or is he going to play inside? I know you and I had a discussion at one point about whether he was going to move full-time to the 3 technique and how effective he could be, how good he was at the end of last season in that role. I'll say this. Again, I'm going to hedge. If Collier primarily plays inside more than outside, I could see that. I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy because that also shows my confidence in Hyder. His tape and how he uses his hands and how he's constantly moving forward and how he attacks and how he keeps guys off of him. I think
Smart.
I think the team has a plan for him. I think they brought him in for a very specific reason, specific role. I think that's what appealed to him about this opportunity. I think it's going to be very similar to how they used Michael Bennett. And I think he would have, let's say, what was the number? Was it 12?
12.
I could see him getting 7 of those, and that would mean Collier would have to get 5. I'm going to buy.
I'm going to sell. I'm selling because I believe that the usage of Kerry Hyder is going to go down from last year. I think last year he was at 65% of total defensive snaps. I think if he's used at that utilization rate for Seattle, something's probably gone wrong a little bit on the defense because we just have too many guys with too much ability to be able to get to the quarterback. I think that he's probably more of a 5-tech in a 5-tech role in a traditional sense, and that's going to put him on the field maybe 40% of the snaps. So I think he's going to have a reduced opportunity to have an impact like that. Doesn't mean that I think that he's going to have a diminished impact or role while he's on the field. I just think he's going to have less opportunity to get to that number because guys like Darrell Taylor are going to have more opportunity. Alton Robinson, you're going to have some sacks from the safety position and from Brooks that are going to impact maybe some of those guys on the front line. And so I think that total combined with Collier's probably in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 total.
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to sell as well. And I think Hyder, it makes this an interesting question because he can definitely make plays, and he's so good with his hands, and that's why he's a cleanup specialist. As other people get pressure and move the quarterback, and then he's always there to clean things up. But I don't think that Collier is going to be an impact pass rusher on the inside. Can he move the pocket or push the pocket and make it so the quarterback can't step up? Yes, but can he get by the guard and make the tackle and the sack? I'm not convinced that he's going to be that guy, and so I think if he ends up at 4, I think that is a good year for him, and that means that Kerry Hyder's got to get to 8. And he did have 8.5 last year, but I'm thinking it's going to be down a little bit this year.
Here's another thing I would add, and I bought on this, is I think anytime Carlos Dunlap's on the field,
Those DTs are going to have...
He's going to get the attention.
Yeah.
And teams are going to account for him and slide another guy his way. And I think that's going to create some of that opportunity.
I'll add this real quick on LJ. To me, I would buy on this, not because I agree with Bill on the diminished play time for Hyder. I think LJ Collier is going to play most of his snaps at the 3-tech, especially if they're using those bear fronts again. I think he is the guy, especially late in the year, the pressures were up. And I just feel like there's some untapped potential there rushing from that 3-tech step. So I would be buying this under the presumption with Carlos Dunlap and some of the other edge rushers that they have, opening things up for their interior guys. in passing situations that I could see Collier getting to 5 or 6 sacks, and Kerry Hyder can get to 5 or 6 sacks because he's going to be starting your 5-tech spot.
Yeah.
So I don't think 12 is out of the question at all with those two guys.
All right, let's do this. I know the three of us had come up with 5 buy or sells each, but if we do that, we're going to be here until the sun goes down. So let's do one more each. So I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to go more. I know this is a training camp preview. I'm going to go more big picture, more kind of down the road. I want to have fun with this one. Buy or sell, John Schneider will one day get the opportunity as general manager of the Seahawks to hire his own head coach. He will be in Seattle beyond Pete Carroll's tenure, and will get a chance because he was hired. A lot of people forget this. He was actually hired by Pete Carroll to collaborate with him. He was the finalists had been named when Carroll was named head coach. I think there were 3 finalists, maybe 4.
I think 4.
And then they interviewed them all again with Carroll present, and then he helped make the decision. Schneider's never had a chance to hire a head coach. He's had other opportunities to leave for other GM jobs. But I have a contact who had some insight into the front office workings from last year, and he said that one of the reasons that the Detroit job, for instance, that was rumored to be appealing to him or that they were going to go aggressively after him wasn't appealing to him is because he likes to play the long game. He's not impatient, and he wants that opportunity here in Seattle. His family loves it here. They're established here. He wants to be the GM someday after Carroll leaves. Is he going to get that opportunity someday? Bill.
That's a great question, and I have an interesting answer for you. And I'm glad that you mentioned the long game, because I think that he would have to play that long game. And the reason that I think that is that I think that we have potentially the future head coach of the Seattle Seahawks on the team in Shane Waldron. And the reason that I say that is that Pete Carroll is signed through 2025, I believe. The future of Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll are tied together. And if this succeeds, if Shane Waldron is successful the way that we all have been talking about the offense being dynamic and being successful and being a top 5 offense, it puts him in prime position in 2-3 years when Pete Carroll looks to retirement legitimately, and we all kind of get that sense. Shane Waldron could be the guy. Now, if Shane Waldron is that guy, that means that John Schneider may have had a hand in it, but the successor is kind of built in.
Yeah. And
he may have to wait another round to get to that point. So I can't remember now if I'm buying or selling what you just said, but that's my answer.
Sounds like you're kind of buying.
I'm buying in a sense, yeah.
So I'm. Wait, are you buying or I'm lost?
I'm kind of buying
because I thought you were selling because you said he doesn't get to.
Yeah,
because
I think he plays the long game and eventually gets there. And I think John Schneider stays with the franchise longer than Pete Carroll.
Okay.
Possibly longer than the first hire at head coach, and stays with the team.
So gotcha. I'm buying, and it comes down to the fact that every time the two of them have signed contracts, his contract has always been longer than Pete's.
A little bit longer every time.
Every single time it's been longer than Pete Carroll's contract. There's a reason for that. It's because it's entirely by design.
And this time was even more pronounced than the last time because it was literally days, right, after we found out about Pete Carroll's extension that we then found out about Schneider's extension. It was very, very close together. It was almost like, that was the plan. And that Jody Allen, kind of.
That once, Pete Carroll signed an extension, so he now is under contract longer. Oh, nope. Schneider gets another extension right then, too, so that his contract... his contract is never shorter than Pete Carroll's, and that's intentional. He is going to be the key part to the post-Carroll transition, and that's going to involve getting a chance to hire a coach.
I'll tell you this: if it happens, it's going to be a fun time to do a podcast because it's going to be a whole different dynamic than we're used to talking about. Corbin, what do you think?
I want to say this before I say buy or sell. The idea of Waldron just tearing it up this year, if that happens, this is an offensive-driven league. the Seahawks are going to have a major conundrum on their hands because you're going to have other teams coming in trying to steal him, even if just one season is a play
I had
caller.
the same thought. Like, he might not make it that long, but he's a Northwest guy. There could be some appeal to staying.
There's all kinds of factors there, but
Sure.
I would think that if he gets an opportunity to become a head coach because he had one great year leading this offense as the coordinator, he's going to jump at that.
Sure.
He's going to interview for it. So what do the Seahawks do in that situation, especially if somehow they got beat out early in the playoffs again? What do you do with your legendary coach that's still under contract through 2025?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to lose Shane Waldron, and you think he might be your guy.
Or you don't want to lose Russell Wilson.
Yeah, there's all kinds of elements to this that we right now we would have no idea how any of that would play out because it could go a number of directions. But I am going to buy just simply because I do think if he has a really good year or two, I think Pete Carroll's still going to want to play out his contract. He is not close to being done as far as I'm concerned. I think Shane Waldron gets a head coaching job somewhere else. That would be my prediction. And then that means eventually, whenever Pete Carroll hangs up his cleats, I think John Schneider's still going to be there. I should have said hang up his Monarchs, but I think that John Schneider will get that opportunity to be able to handpick his next guy. And I think he's still going to be there for several years after Carroll departs.
Okay. Bill, give us one more buy or sell.
Let's see. Robert Kimdichie makes the 53-man roster and becomes the primary interior pass rusher for the 3-tech spot.
Okay. Keith?
I'm going to sell.
Very, very.
I should have had the Jeopardy theme loaded up here. Wait, I kind of have this one. Wait. Keith's thinking.
I'm going to sell on. God, there's two parts to that again. Does he make the roster? I think he does. Is he the primary interior pass rusher? I don't know.
If he makes the roster,
he probably
he
probably is.
Yeah.
And if he's not going to be, he probably doesn't make the roster. I just really like the combination of guys like Kerry Hyder and RJ Collier, and
LJ,
I think they're going to be given a lot of extra snaps, and it's not going to be just Robert Kimdichie's job here. You're going to be our interior pass rush specialist. But as you can tell, I am not confident in that sell. So
I'm going to sell it basically in the same premise that you just did. I think he makes the 53-man roster right now. That could change in a few weeks when camp gets started. I mean, I need to see what it looks like in actual training camp practices and preseason games. Those are going to be huge for him, just to really get a picture, what feelings we had coming out of OTAs and mini camps. Is he actually going to stay motivated? Does it translate when the bullets are actually flying? But based on what we know now, I think he makes the roster. To call him the primary interior rusher, I think that's Poona Ford. I think Poona Ford is ready for a monster year rushing the passer. He had 28 pressures last year. I know he only had a couple sacks, but you could see he, just like Jaron Reed, when they got Carlos Dunlap, the light came on. And he's an incredible athlete at 300 pounds. I think this is a year that Poona Ford puts it all together, and I think next offseason he gets a much bigger extension.
Bill and I talked about this on the show, I think it was a week ago. I think this is the year that we see Poona Ford at the 3-tech some, because Monet is the bigger guy, and he's the more natural, pure nose tackle.
Monet fills up like 4 phone booths. I mean, he's a big dude. I mean, they need to. He's perfect for the position. I was joking with a few of the other beat writers. They got to get him a different jersey with a little bit more thread because he's a big dude. But he has gotten in much better shape since he first arrived because he was around 366. They list him, as Pete Carroll says, a svelte 345 pounds. And he's trimmed down a little bit. And he actually gave him a little bit as a pass rusher at times last year. And I think that's why they were like, we're moving on from Damon Harrison. Yeah. Because Damon Harrison at this stage of his career doesn't offer anything there. Monet actually can get after the QB and collapse the pocket a little bit. So, yeah, I agree with you on the 3-tech with Poona.
I'm going to sell just because I think he makes the roster. I mean, I'm optimistic that he seems, his head seems to be in the right place, and athletically, and he's healthy. I know coming out of college there were some health issues too. There was something with the knee, or there was something going on there. But I just think that as I sell on the primary pass rusher, because I think they're going to treat that position as a rotational one. Is all. I just don't.
There's going to be a lot of bodies.
I don't know that there's going to be the opportunity there to do that. So I'm going to buy and sell. Again,
Yep.
I'm going to take the authority position here and do a little cheating, because I'm still a little ticked off about the math situation. Keith, buy or sell? Give us one.
Jordan Brooks will lead the Seahawks in tackles in 2021.
Wow.
I want to pull the trigger. I want to buy, but then I remember number 54 is still here. I'm going to sell, but I think Jordan Brooks gets triple digits this year. I think Jordan Brooks is going to get over 100 tackles this year. I just think Bobby Wagner, though, is still one of the best tackling machines in the game.
Well, let's talk about utilization a little bit. So Jordan Brooks last year, maybe 40% of the snaps.
And he had 57 tackles.
So where do you see him this year on utilization?
I'd be surprised if he's playing any less than 90% of the snaps.
And given the fact that the team may want to have a guy like Marquise Blair, Nugo Amadi, and Jamal Adams on the field all at the same time, and utilizing Darrell Taylor.
I think Taylor would play Leo in that case. They would still have – Bobby's going to be on the field.
Because there's only so many snaps to go around.
But they're not taking 54 off the field.
Correct.
So
you still think Brooks comes up at 90% utilization?
Well, because you're going to have two linebackers on the field almost all the time. So those would be the two guys. Because Darrell Taylor will be playing Leo. So you can have all three of them out there in those dime sets.
I could definitely see him having over 100 tackles.
Oh, yeah. There's no disputing that. If he's healthy, I think over 100. I can't say that Bobby's not going to be the guy. Until I see on the field that Bobby is declining, Bobby Wagner is going to lead this team in tackles. So,
yeah, that's why I sell, unless Bobby gets hurt and Jordan has to play the middle. I think the way this defense is constructed and as balanced as that roster is, I think opportunities are going to be there for Bobby to kind of be the cleanup guy and just kind of take care of things in the middle of the field. But it's funny that none of us mentioned Brooks as a breakout player, and maybe it's because he was a first-round pick and he played well in the second half last season.
He was one of the guys.
He was my second guy.
He was a guy that I was like, I really want to include him, but then I backed off.
I do think
there's just so many names. There's so many guys on defense.
But maybe there's another category for him. I do think he's one of the guys on the roster that has
to make a Pro Bowl that
has an opportunity to become a star. That people aren't viewing him as a star now. That by certainly if he stays healthy by the end of this season, he's going to get the opportunity to prove that. Not only was he not an overdraft at the position like some people thought he was at the moment, but maybe start to become thought of as a guy like Bobby Wagner has now clearly become as a guy that maybe was a bargain at the end of the first round.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the players on defense that's one of the most instinctive football players on the team. Yeah. And as he comes into his second year, he stops thinking about what he needs to be doing instead of just reacting. He's on a completely
his ability
different level.
To adjust. You could see it in that Rams game in Week 16. They got to play a bootleg play that he messed up with coverage, and Bobby Wagner kind of looked at him like they went to that same play like one quarter later, and guess who was in the right spot that time? Jordan Brooks. Jared Goff had nowhere to go and had to eat the ball.
It's always fun to see. Because it doesn't always happen. It's always fun to see a guy's college tape and see the skills and see the things that you like about him and then see them translate. In the second half of last season, we really saw that. That's the guy that we saw at Texas Tech, and that's the guy that we saw, and that's why they dropped him.
Well, okay, so the reason why I said that one is that Jordan Brooks' game speed. Like, he brings speed to the defense in a way that Bobby Wagner did when he, in his first four or 5 years in the league. Brooks brings that same kind of speed. Wagner, he's still the best middle linebacker in the NFL.
He just doesn't move like he used to.
But he doesn't move like he used to. And that speed and his ability to make those adjustments and get out there and actually make the play is why I think that Brooks has a shot at leading the team. I would probably go with Wagner too, because until Wagner doesn't,
you just can't doubt number 54 until he gives you reason.
I mean, he's led not just the team but the NFL in tackles. Like, what is it, 3 of the last 4 years? And
the dude just
the
dude's just a monster. He's a first ballot Hall of Fame.
Oh, absolutely.
Corbin, bring us home. Give us one more buy or sell.
So I'm going to go with one with a guy that we've talked about quite a bit in this show, but he did not play a single snap last year. Darrell Taylor starts at least 15 games at Sam linebacker.
Wow.
So I have to buy because of what I said earlier. And one of my buy or sells that I had on deck that I didn't use was, will he get 8 sacks or more? And here's the thing. Like, none of us know. Like, it's easy to sit here and go, well, he hasn't made this last year. You have to assume he's going to be healthy.
We don't have Biff's almanac, so we have
right.
no
I mean,
idea.
I'm an optimist. I like to go into every season assuming that if team says the guy's healthy, he's healthy. And he certainly was on the field during the OTAs, and he looked like he was healthy. Again, I go back to, this team moved up to get him in the second round of the draft. Thought about taking him in the first round. Said he was on their board. If Jordan Brooks has been off, maybe they would have gone Darrell Taylor. That they would have been comfortable taking him in the 20s in the first round. That's how highly they think of him. And then the leg didn't heal the way they thought it would, and he wasn't available to him as a rookie. And then they make the position change. He has the versatility. He's going to get the opportunity. I think he's the starter there. First of all, there's really no one that's going to push him. None of us think Cody Barton's going to beat him out there.
No.
It's not a position that's going to be on the field every single play. It's going to be a situational thing, but he's also a guy that's going to be used on up on the line too. So I buy.
Yeah, I'm buying for all those reasons, and the fact that Pete Carroll said he's our guy. Mm-hmm. He's our guy. There's no restrictions. There's literally no restrictions on his play or anything like that.
You can tell when Pete's saying something nice about a guy, but not 100%.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can tell when he's effusive about someone and he went out of his way to talk about Darrell Taylor.
And that's why. And there's no reason why he wouldn't be. If not starting, he's going to get serious snaps. So, but yeah, you could easily say he could start all the games.
Yeah.
And I'd still buy that.
Okay. Keith?
So I'm going to buy, but it's not. The caveat there is he is going to be the Sam linebacker, but will he start at Sam linebacker? Is the team going to start?
He's pro football referencing us right now. Is it going to be counted as a start?
And that's really what.
When they play the Cardinals, there may not be a Sam on the field. I'm
buying out of the principle of the idea that he is the starting Sam linebacker. But I'm not convinced that on the first defensive play they won't be in the nickel a lot, which will therefore he won't have the total starts. But yeah, I'm still buying.
Yeah, I think that probably would have been the best way to word it, just starting a certain number of games because of the positional flexibility. And I know there are a number of other beat writers that have been clamoring for there being a positional battle there. And I know Cody Barton, first 2 years, he's gotten some reps there. I can't see him winning that strong side job with what Pete Carroll said and the fact that he really struggled in run defense, holding the edge his rookie year when he played it. I just don't think he's got the play strength to be able to
He's not
play
a strong side linebacker.
No, he just doesn't have the...
He's a weak side
I think
linebacker.
Darrell Taylor can do that because of his defensive end experience.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm not just buying. I'm putting my home down on this one. So.
All right, so the next thing on the docket, we are going to switch over here to something that we have touched on in about every segment of this show up until this point. And so some of this might be a little redundant, but it also emphasizes the importance and the potential impact of this hire. At the end of last season, Pete Carroll was asked in an end-of-season press conference, are you going to make a change at offensive coordinator? And he essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, over my dead body. Right? Brian Schottenheimer's the guy. And he got defensive about it in a way that Pete Carroll, it's rare when you see him. He was about as mad as you can see him. He was irritated. The next day, he let Brian Schottenheimer go. And then there was a search for an offensive coordinator. There was a lot of kind of twists and turns along the way, and there was a lot of questions about which way he was going to go. And initially in the search, it didn't look good. He went to the dinosaurs, and he went to some of his old cronies, and he went to some of the guys that seemed like they would just be yes men, or guys that didn't seem like they'd be yes men, but who had a history that wouldn't excite the fan base. He ends up hiring Shane Waldron out of the Rams system, a young guy, up and coming. We're expecting a more dynamic element to the offense. We've heard about how the offense is going to change, how it's going to be quicker paced, more rhythm, crossing routes, Rams, blah, blah, blah. Are the expectations already for Shane Waldron going to be difficult for him to live up to? And what are some of your general thoughts right now as it sits with the impact he's going to have on the coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, yes, to all that, and more. Yes, the expectations are very high. The expectations are high because of the national media attention, that will surely come, as attention is paid to Russell Wilson and the contract situation and the relationship with Pete Carroll and the performance of the offense, and for whatever reason, should it not hold up to those standards, will be questioned on a weekly basis. If Russell is happy, if they made the right choice, if Pete's going to survive, if Russell will leave because he's not, the performance is lacking for whatever reason. So yes, there will be a ton of scrutiny, a ton of spotlight on him, and so forth. Having said all that, this is the most consequential signing, I think, in Pete Carroll's tenure, players or coaches, because this transcends this year. It transcends this team. It's the future of the franchise because it involves Russell Wilson. This is directly impacts his ability to do his job and do it well. We all seem to agree and recognize that this puts Russ in the best position that he's been in to take advantage of his skills with skilled players around him in an offense that is well suited to propel this team to new heights. But what if it doesn't?
It also puts him in a corner.
It does.
Right?
It does. And so you kind of take a look at that and you weigh it out and you say, I'm going to buy. I'm going to believe that this is going to happen. And that's kind of where I'm sitting. It's like when this process was going through the process itself, it was a very methodical process. They took a lot of time. It was well thought out and orchestrated. In the background, you had the national media at the same time starting the whole Russell Wilson is unhappy with the Seahawks process. And so it was just kind of a cumbersome time to be a Seahawk fan, not knowing all the information, being fed a narrative that turned out maybe not to be completely the whole story. And Shane Waldron comes in, high expectations. He's a hand-selected coach by Pete Carroll and Wilson, and he's got this huge opportunity, I think, really, to establish himself, establish a rapport with Wilson that takes that relationship forward into the franchise that goes beyond Pete Carroll, and this thing could be, again, I think one of the most consequential signings just because of how much it impacts every level of the franchise going forward. So I think it's tremendous for me. I like it. I love the signing. I think it's perfect. I'm very hopeful that it's going to result in tangible results that elevate the team to the next level, because quite frankly, we've been kind of stuck at the same level. We haven't been able to get past a certain playoff level and so forth, and I think this gives us the best opportunity to do that.
Keith?
Yeah, okay, so we've seen Russell Wilson play at a near MVP level, at least for part of last year and part of the year before, and he did that playing in an offense that was terribly designed. I mean, if you look around to 32 NFL teams and their offensive coordinators, and you were to rank them last year, where would Brian Schottenheimer have landed? If it's above 29th, you're probably being a homer.
First 8 games, he would have been top 5, right? Right? Offense led the league 35 points a game.
So Keith and I have had arguments before about this on social media because I just listen. Do I think that there were shortcomings there? Absolutely. And I think saying that he's a top 10, top 15 coordinator would be an absolute exaggeration based on his past. Yeah. At the same time, looking back at the film and stuff, I can't put all the blame on him in the second half. There were design question marks, and I questioned him about the tight end usage multiple times in press conferences.
You saw a ceiling.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah, the adaptability was not there.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 off seasons in a row. The primary wide receiver of that year, so 2 years ago was Lockett, this last year was Metcalf, came out and said, yeah, teams knew what we were doing, and we were unable to adapt. There was no adaptation done in our game.
That was really, and I think that's what went down after Carroll talked with the media. There was this discussion about philosophical differences. I think the 2 of them got together, and I think honestly, Pete probably was going into that hoping I can get Brian to buy into some changes that we need to make, and I don't think he was willing to do that. And so that's what ultimately led to the dismissal, because from everything I've gathered, Russell told us straight up he was not pleased by the decision to fire Schottenheimer.
Well, Schottenheimer is known as one of the best quarterback coaches in the NFL.
And that, I believe, has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. And he did some great things with Russ. Yeah. And not just like, the play calling and whatnot, but his fundamentals, his footwork, and some of those things.
He's so much better in that.
He made a big improvement in Russ's game. Hire him as a quarterback coach, that's an A+ hire. Hire him as an offensive coordinator, and it's at best a B.
And heck, even a passing game coordinator in Jacksonville, when you don't have all of the stuff on his plate, might be a little bit better at it. But I agree with you on the adaptation aspect. Like I said, what I asked him about several times last year was the tight end usage, because that was the most baffling to me. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you go back and you watch the film, number 3 had something to do with that too.
Yeah.
The tight ends were getting open, and either he was not seeing them, or wasn't getting the ball out to him and was being indecisive. So,
and that's what we don't know, and we won't know until the bullets start to fly. Is everything we've heard. And I think the most promising thing is the way that Pete talks about Shane Waldron. Is he talks about him differently than he talked about Brian Schottenheimer. He talks about him differently than he talked about Darrell Bevel. He talked recently about letting go and letting him run the thing, because he seems to have a command of it, and in a way that seems genuine. It doesn't just seem like he's just
not coach speak.
Exactly. And sometimes Pete does the coach speak thing.
Well, every head coach does. If you're not doing your job.
And sometimes you can see through Pete, and sometimes you can't. But he seemed really genuine in that way.
So you're going to leave Waldron autonomous.
It sure sounds like it.
Paired with what Russell Wilson.
But what we don't know is, will it work? Will he get through to Russ? Because Russ is saying all the right things about rhythm and quickness.
But are those flaws that we saw? And week 17, that game was the worst one for me. There was a play that Jacob Hollister was wide open on a corner route, and he just ate it.
The Giants game was painful too. He just didn't adjust. He just didn't take what they were giving him.
The O-line was playing just fine in that game.
Yep.
So the big question is, can Waldron help those areas of his game? To me, that's more important than the schematic stuff is.
He's got to get through to Russ and get him out of that mindset. And Russ is even, I forget the exact quote, but he said a couple years ago when he was asked about, do you stick with plays too long? Do you look too much to hit the home run sometimes? And he said, I'm never going to stop doing that.
No, and you don't want him to completely, because he's so good at it.
But Brian Schottenheimer, when he was hired, what did Carroll say? It was to make Russell accountable. Which would imply to make him change those things and do the things, improve at the things he's not good at, and he did in some ways. Brian Schottenheimer made him his pocket awareness, his movement in the pocket, his His awareness of moving up in the pocket improved
nonetheless,
by leaps and bounds. Can he take that next step and use the middle of the field in the quick passing
We
game?
got to week 16 and 17 last year, though, and we had a number of us talking about whether or not Russell Wilson was broken.
Mm-hmm.
Like, fundamentally, what has gone on with this quarterback?
The game at Arizona, did that game
the
break
escape the pocket stuff that was early in his career, it came back.
Yep.
And
its ugly head.
And so is that completely gone? I believe it is. I think it was just one of those things that it just happened.
Things snowballed.
And so this year, I would think that is completely gone, but what if it isn't? I don't think it is. It's a problem.
I'll say this. You talk about it being the most impactful hire of Pete Carroll's career. I think it might be the last most impactful one. If it doesn't work, if it works great, and like you talk about, they have a great year, and Waldron gets hired, and he goes somewhere else after a year, fine. Pete's coming off a big year, presumably, that got Waldron hired. He goes and hires another guy. If it doesn't work, or if it's shaky, if it's mediocre after a couple of years, I don't know that we can do this again. That we can just have Pete go, wow, it's time to make a change again. I got to go get a fourth offensive coordinator, and now I'm 70 whatever years old.
That would create some really complicated
Then we might be
dynamics.
talking about maybe we need to make a bigger change. This has to work. I think for Russell's future here in Seattle, whether he finishes his career here or gets to another contract,
Lombardi Trophy,
it has to work. And it's
what
not
is your-
Super Bowl or bust, but it's
close.
Deep playoff run or bust.
Is
It's
it
maybe it's NFC Championship game or bust.
Right.
Yeah.
It's,
And I think
it's
there's a
beat
lot
the
of-
Rams or bust.
I wrote an article about this a few days ago, and there's a lot of variables at play here because let's say that they start off slow, which could absolutely happen. You've got a new
For sure.
coordinator, and in
6 of
fact,
the first
I would
8
be
on the road.
surprised if it doesn't, and they've got a really brutal first
Yeah.
month and a half, especially with the Titans getting Julio Jones. But you start slow, and then things progress. Let's say they get to 11 wins and they get into the playoffs, or 12 wins, they get into the playoffs,
And then they get hot.
and they get really hot. Okay. Then everything played out just fine. Now, if they go even if they get bounced in the first round or two in the playoffs, if Russell Wilson's like, you know what, we really started to make progress late in the year. I like the roster we've got. You might avoid the drama that we had this past offseason. But if you go the opposite, where they come out just house of fire and they're lighting up scoreboards, and then late in the year they sputter again, and we see some of those things come back from last year, and Waldron's not able to do anything with that, then I would be surprised if Wilson's under center the next year.
Yeah.
So no pressure again. I don't want to say Super Bowl or bust, but I think NFC Championship game or bust.
Yeah.
Russ wants to get deep in the playoffs.
So
how do you get there?
Let me ask you this, Corbin. Virtually nobody is giving us those sorts of odds this year. Nobody's talking about the Seahawks in a way that puts them even in that game.
Athlon picked them 4th in the NFC West.
How do you reconcile
Which is
that
absurd.
with the expectations that you're kind of setting?
So, again, I'm going to go back to the talent on paper.
Yeah.
And I think there are some places that are going to overlook what they have. But, I mean, they're bringing back all their big players from last year, and you've got an improvement at tight end. You're believing you've got an improvement in your offensive coordinator. You brought in one of the best pass-protecting guards in football that's still in the prime of his career, and you got him for a 5th-round pick, and you extended him. I mean, there should be a lot of optimism. This defense has most of their pieces back. I think Jamal Adams he's barely scratched his upside in this defense. He was just trying to get comfortable, and he had injuries last year.
Yeah.
There are all those variables to consider, but you are playing in the NFC West. And so you could finish 4th and win 10 games. I mean, the Cardinals could win the division. The 49ers could win it. The Rams, obviously.
But you're already, and I'm in agreement with you, but what I'm saying is your NFC championship or bust sitting at this table in before August.
And you've got all these obstacles that could potentially be in your way. Yeah, it's not a good situation if you're looking from Russell Wilson's standpoint. So,
part of it, though, is that the only time that the Seahawks have been thought of by national media and stuff as one of the favorites was 2013, 2014, 2015. That's the only time, and maybe 2006. Right, because when they came in 2005, they were not thought of that way. But then they went to the Super Bowl. So in 2006, they'll go back.
Right.
They have the talent to be there, but they're not considered there. It's like Dallas. Dallas never has the talent to be there, but they're always in that conversation nationally. There's a reason why they never make the playoffs. They're just not a good team.
I know there are a lot of people in national media that disagree with me, and I'm not saying this being a homer. I'm just a beat reporter. But when you look top to bottom with this roster, how can you say it's anything but a top 5?
Yeah.
They've upgraded the pass protection.
I agree.
They have upgraded their pass rush. Their secondary, the corner position, there's question marks, but DJ Reed was outstanding the second half last year. You've heard my thoughts on the Keller Witherspoon.
They're adding Penny back in.
They've got
added
two Pro Bowl.
Eskridge.
They have 2 Pro Bowl safeties. Their special teams is fantastic, which is an equalizer when we're talking championship games and stuff. So the talent is there. The question is, do you put it together with the coaching staff? And it all goes back to Mr. Waldron.
Shane
I hate
Waldron,
to say
he's
too much
that's-
pressure, but
nice.
there's a lot. Can you make this offense hum the way that it should with all the pieces that you have put around your quarterback?
I think a lot of that, the talent's there, is the coaching staff there, and the view of Pete Carroll is he's a dinosaur, and the team would be better off without him. I think that's kind of the belief. And
I don't agree with that at all.
None of us at this table do.
None of us do. But there is that.
That's a
attitude
lazy
out there.
argument that you see a lot of.
But again, we come back to Waldron. Him hiring a younger guy that he didn't have a history with, didn't have a connection with, I think is a sign that he is willing to accept the fact that later in his career that he needs to adjust. Because what happened with Mike Holmgren when he was here is the league passed him by. They adjusted to what he was doing, and he was so stubborn, and he refused to adapt.
He doubled down on everything.
And he became a dinosaur overnight, and then he was out of the league. I think the Waldron hire on its face, regardless of how it works out in the future.
He's not trending that way.
Yeah, it makes a difference. So let's do this. Let's wrap up with, we've talked about kind of all the things that we think, all the ingredients of the cake, right? How good's the cake going to taste? Let's finish up with some predictions, and I want some hard and fast. We got 17 games now, right? Still hard for me to get used to that when I'm thinking of numbers. I'll start. I think with 17 games, I really do, and I'm always the optimist, but I'll say this, and you've heard me on my show, and we've talked about it on shows that we've done together, and I know you and I have as well. At the beginning of this offseason, I was the optimistic. Dan was not to be found. Limited cap space, no draft picks, real challenges on the roster, huge gaps and holes on the roster.
Russell Wilson may be getting traded and not having a quarterback.
And all of that on top of it, what John Schneider was able to do this offseason with the creativity and his recruiting ability and being able to convince guys this is the place to be and this is the place to stay is remarkable, because this is an improved roster, as you pointed out. And I didn't think there was a chance to do that. I think, and again, assuming health, right? Because you can't predict those things. I think this is a 13-win team, and it's a good division. And I think you can make the case that the teams are going to beat each other up a little bit. That maybe no team in the NFC West goes undefeated or goes 2-0 in the division. But you look at the rest of that schedule, even with all the road games early on, which haven't been as big a challenge the last few years under Pete Carroll. I think it's a 13-win team. I think the floor is maybe 11. And it's a team that should win the NFC West. Now, the Rams could win 13 games too. And we could be talking about, battling this thing out to the very, very end, which makes the schedule really interesting because it's not NFC West loaded anymore at the end of the season like it has been in the past. I think this is a team capable of winning the division and going deep in the playoffs and making a playoff run or making a Super Bowl run. And that's just not me with rose-colored glasses on. I just think all the things we've talked about here lead to the fact that this is a team in position to do that. If they don't, then we're talking about potential transition next offseason. And so I think that adds to the pressure. I also think there are going to be those in the national media that don't agree with what we're talking about here and aren't as optimistic and think that they've fallen back in the NFC West to the Rams and the Niners now that they're all healthy, regardless of their quarterback situation. And that will only add fuel to the fire. I think this team thrives on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things when you look at it is the division is rough. I mean, let's face it, the 4 teams in the NFC West are probably in the top 7 teams in the NFC. The Cardinals, for me personally, like they're like the one. But you could take the Cardinals, which I think are the 4th best team in the division, and they put them in 5 other divisions, and they would be the favorite in that division. And so it's a tough spot to be.
Yeah.
But I'm not as sold on the Cardinals, especially defensively, and their head coach. The 49ers are a mess at quarterback. I know they. I'm sorry, you're not winning a lot with Jimmy Garoppolo, and Lance is a year away.
Yeah.
They will be a force a year from now. I think this is a transition year for them. And the Rams were a very good team last year. They got significantly better at the most important position at quarterback, but they lost a tremendous amount of their depth. And so early in the year, they might start out really hot and be the team that everyone's looking at, but can they maintain that as the year goes on? Because injuries are a part of the NFL, and their depth, that's what they had to give up in order to move.
They sold out. They're Super Bowl or bust, and they have to carry that pressure with them.
Yes. And so there's not all 3 of those teams. They're very good teams, but they're all flawed. They're all someone that I think that Seattle is better than and can beat. Now, head to head, I'm not picking Seattle to go 6-0 in the division, and no one should. But if they go 4-2 in the division, they win the division.
Yeah.
And so you say 13 wins. I was my natural. I leaned right into 12. Just my instant pick. I think that's a fair spot for them to be. 12 wins. Does it win the division? Maybe. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But it gets them in the playoffs guaranteed.
Yeah. Bill?
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of leaning your direction. 13 wins. If you take a look at the last 4 years, Seattle went 9 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins, 12 wins. We've got an extra game this year.
Are you doing math again?
Let's go ahead and keep that trend and go to 13. And I think that is true for a number of respects, not just because it adds up, but because of all the things that you said are true.
Yeah.
And I think that the team is better. The team is well equipped to get to 13. You've got the extra game. We start on the road 4 out of the first 6 games in the season. That's a little rough, but it's not something that's we can't overcome. And I think that we can get there. I think if we don't get there, I think that Corbin's right in that we are kind of an NFC championship or bust situation.
Yeah, 9 or 10 wins.
I think getting to 12 wins or 13 wins puts you in that category.
Yeah.
And anything less is really disappointing. It's not unacceptable, but it's disappointing to where you want to be and you want to end up. And Russell Wilson certainly has an expectation of winning, of getting to that point, of getting over that hump, of winning that division round game that we've not been able to do, of putting teams away in that division round that we are better at. We're better than the Rams, with Matthew Stafford coming over. Come on.
Yeah.
We've got a better, deeper roster.
Right.
You look at the 49ers. We're in direct competition with them. They don't have a bad roster, but we have a better roster. We have a better opportunity. And so, to me, and call me a homer. I don't care. I am a homer. Let's go for it. This is the year that we go for it. We get to 13 wins. I think we get back to the NFC Championship game, and if we can get home field advantage, this is the year that we can get back to the Super Bowl.
Corbin,
I'm not going to make any predictions in the win-loss column at this point, just because I will have my employers wanting that at some point. But
fair enough.
I think that they should be the favorite to win the division by a very small margin. I think the Rams are right there too with Matthew Stafford.
Yeah.
I think, and yes, their depth has been hit a little bit. They're still loaded.
They are loaded.
They're still a very, very good football team, well coached. I think the Cardinals right now would be my 3rd team in the NFC West.
Interesting.
And it's not that I think the 49ers are a bad football team, because I think every team in this division could win 10 games or more. The quarterback situation, if I'm a 49ers fan, even with Kyle Shanahan running the show, and I think he's a really good play caller, I look at the outside. I like Brandon Ayuk, but I'm just not necessarily sold on the weapons aside from
Nobody scares you.
George Kittle's the one guy that really terrorizes you.
Yeah.
But I look at them and I think they're going to be competitive. They're going to be able to run the ball because Kyle Shanahan's great at coordinating the run game. Their defense is going to get some of their key guys back, but they also lost some really good players on that defense too. And so Arizona, the question I have was their coaching staff. And so can Cliff Kingsbury get this team to play like they're capable of their potential? If he does, that's a team that could win 12 games. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if I'm sold on that. So I think both those teams are around double-digit wins just because this division is loaded. But I don't know that I necessarily consider those two to be real threats to win the division unless San Francisco suddenly, if Trey Lance gets to play or Jimmy Garoppolo just randomly says, oh, you drafted a QB, I'm going to become an all-pro this year.
You're right.
If something like that happens, then San Francisco could be really dangerous.
Yeah, but there's nothing in Jimmy Garoppolo's history that suggests that he's going to do that.
No, there's not.
And Trey Lance has all the talent in the world. He's probably my favorite of the quarterbacks. He was also the biggest project of the top quarterbacks. He's
going to take time.
And quite frankly, the Seahawks have Russell Wilson. I mean,
they still have the best quarterback in the division.
That's right.
I'm not going to make win-loss predictions, but I mean, I think Seattle has the roster. I think it would be a big disappointment if they don't at least get to 12 wins. I think it would be a disappointment with the talent that they've got. I mean, now if they start slow and, like I said, and they finish strong and they get to like 10 or 11 and then they're a real threat in the playoffs, then you can forgive a little bit. Mm-hmm. But that would be the only case where, I mean, if they miss the playoffs, I think you can kiss. I don't think Wilson ever was really trying to force his way out this offseason from the conversations I've had. That won't be the case next March if you miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not the win total. Because if like you said, if they start slow and there's a transition and then they get hot at the end, they make the playoffs and make a run,
Russell's going to be pumped.
That's at 10 or 11
wins.
He's
going to be Arnold. He's going to be pumped up.
If they kind of do what they did last year and they start really hot and they win 11, they go 11-0 and then only win one out of the remaining rest of the game and get bounced early.
Then he's going to be like, I can't win another title here.
They just can't have another Giants performance, which is right now.
I was going to mention the
right
worst game
now on NFL
year.
Network.
Awesome.
It's unfortunate that the webcam can't get the. Right now, the NFL Network is replaying that game. There's Russ fumbling a snap. Okay, so it all kind of went downhill from there. They had a 3-0 lead, and then it all went downhill.
That game was bad.
Just another sign that this was the best place for us to host this. Ozzies Tavern at 105 West Mercer in Seattle. Thank you to Kathy Mahoney and Aaron and Amy and the staff here and all the people that showed up to watch this. We got to wrap this up. We promised we'd keep it to 3 hours. We could easily go another 3 hours. Well, if we let me put it this way: if we win another 3 hours, maybe even if we win another 10 minutes, I'd have to step away for a minute. I don't know how Scott Hansen does the red zone on Sundays without stepping away. He must not drink any liquid in the 24 hours leading up to the show. But listen, this was a lot of fun. Bill and Keith and Corbin, thanks for joining us. Any final parting thoughts before we wrap this show up?
Yeah,
Bill?
Thank you. It was great to get together with you. We've been planning this for a while. I really enjoyed being here, talking Seahawks football. Tremendous time.
Keith?
I was just going to say thanks to people who are watching at home and just getting a chance to talk with you guys. And this has been fun. We've got to do this again.
Yeah, I think we got to make this an annual, make it a tradition.
Well,
come up from Arizona.
Exactly.
We're talking about doing it in Arizona next year, perhaps. So
I got relatives there.
There you go.
Free hotel.
But we're going to need, if anyone out there, we're going to need a sponsor next year. Maybe someone that can hook us up with some airfare, or a hotel room, or something. But
there you go.
This was great. Again, thanks to the folks at Ozzies, and just a reminder, this is a big hockey week for the Seattle Kraken. The expansion draft, they start filling out their roster with players from other teams. That's on Wednesday, I believe, at 5 o'clock. They're throwing a big party here for that. Come on down, enjoy some food and drink specials and some giveaways. And then Friday is the actual NHL draft where they fill out the rest of their roster. A lot of exciting things happening with the Seattle Kraken, which are going to play their games in the brand new, remodeled, rebuilt Climate Pledge Arena 2 blocks away here. Lots of sports history in this building here. And great people here. Come on down, have a good time. It's a good time to come down on Friday and Saturday nights, too. There's karaoke, there's dancing, there's multiple bars.
And
A lot of fun to be had.
And the food is fantastic here. So definitely, you guys should come out and check it out.
I know these guys had burgers. I had a Cuban sandwich that was terrific today, so a lot of fun to be had. We're going to wrap it up. For those of you watching on the live stream, if you missed any part of this, if you want to catch it tomorrow, we will be posting this, both of us, on both the Seahawks Playbook podcast platform and the Emerald City Sportscast. So that's going to do it for us. Dan Viens, Bill Alfstadt, Keith Myers, Corbin Smith. Go Seahawks. Thanks, you guys.
Go
Let's
Seahawks.
hear it from the people in attendance. Thanks to my buddy Jesse for taking a bunch of pictures. You'll be seeing those online over the next couple of days. We're going to wrap this up. This has been the Seahawks training camp. Opens up later this week. Stay tuned to both of our podcasts later this week for more on the Seahawks. And on my show, we'll talk some Mariners too. And be sure to tune in to the Locked On Seahawks podcast daily, Monday through Friday on the Locked On Network. And also read Corbin's stuff on Seahawk Maven and SI.com. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you soon.